As the ground trembled, the lively atmosphere in the camp instantly turned cold and professional. The firekeepers, who had been enjoying a late supper just moments ago, instantly rose to their feet and picked up their weapons. A moment later, they were standing in a defensive formation, ready to repel any kind of attack. Nephis stood up as well. The white flames burning in her eyes grew more intense, and the fire behind her grew taller, chasing the darkness further away. What is it? Was a nightmare creature approaching them from afar? Or had the master of the ancient temple decided to betray them? She was going to find out soon. As they stood motionlessly, preparing for battle, the ground shuddered again. A cold wind rose, bringing with it a strong smell of rotting leaves and humid jungle. A tense silence settled over the world. A moment later, Nephis felt a new presence beside her. Turning her head slightly, she saw the Lord of Shadows standing at the edge of the camp, peering into the darkness calmly. He had appeared out of nowhere without making any noise, as if the shadows themselves had risen up to spawn him. He seemed to have discarded his mask, but since Nephis was behind him, she couldn't see his face. The firekeepers flinched, startled by his sudden appearance. Each was an experienced master and carried memories that enhanced their senses. It wasn't easy to sneak up on them, and yet the Lord of Shadows had done it effortlessly. Nephis frowned, realizing just how vulnerable her subordinates were in front of him. What is happening? Her voice remained calm, addressing the mysterious saint with sufficient decorum. He remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. It's nothing much. One of the great sleepers has awoken. That's all. Shadow lingered for a second, then added, I usually keep them asleep to avoid trouble, but the most feisty ones sometimes escape their slumber. A great nightmare creature? Keep them asleep? Nephis frowned slightly. Where a serpentine head was before on Lord of Shadow, the sharp tip of a gargantuan sword suddenly appeared. Slowly, but also too fast to notice, the body of the transcendent terror rippled and turned into an inconceivable Odachi. Its hilt and curving blade as long as the shadow giant was tall. Finally, a dark titan was standing on the bone plain, his body encased in a suit of fearsome onyx armor, wielding a giant obsidian sword. He looked like an ancient divinity that had descended to the mortal realm from the heavens, or maybe crawled out of the lightless depths of the abyss. Not paying the firekeepers any attention, the shadow giant took another step. Something lunged at him from the darkness, a grotesque monstrosity that towered above the ground, its mottled fur writhing with a swarm of pale maggots. Its misshapen head was crowned with sharp horns, and its maw was wide open, revealing a wall of massive fangs. Its limbs were a mess of claws, chitinous scythes, and pulsating tentacles. A chill spread through the hearts of the firekeepers at the sight of the hideous abomination. However, the towering sword of the giant colossus only fell once. One strike, and the neck of the great beast was cleanly severed, its head rolling to the ground. The massive body toppled and crashed into the bone surface of the dead god's breastbone, causing it to tremble once again. The great beast was dead, just like that. The dark colossus peered at it with disdain, then shook his head and crumbled on itself, turning into a tide of shadows. A moment later, all that was left was the corpse of the hideous monstrosity and the deep groove left in the white bone by the tip of the obsidian Odachi. Silence settled over Godgrave once again. Nephis stared at the corpse of the abomination, her expression unreadable. Eventually, she tilted her head a little. One strike. He had destroyed the abomination in one strike. Suddenly, she was glad to have made a pact with the man who called himself Shadow. It was much better to be his ally than his enemy. Far to the northwest of Bastion, across the chain of death zones, crowned by Godgrave, lay the vast human enclave ruled by the great clan Song. Although younger and smaller in territory than the Sword Domain, the kingdom of Keysong was nevertheless just as populous and potent. Unlike Bastion itself, which lay at the heart of Valor's territory, the capital of Song was located at the northernmost point of her domain, on the slopes of a towering mountain chain that branched out from the Hollow Mountains. It was a stark and beautiful place, nestled between snowy peaks and fuming volcanoes, shrouded in snowstorms and raining ash. Its name was Ravenheart. The great citadel had another name in the runic language of the Nightmare spell, but after an obscure figure from the first generation of the Awakened conquered it, people gradually started calling the remote mountain palace by her true name. The obscure Awakened warrior was the founder of the Song clan, and Keysong's late mother. Her daughter elevated their minor clan to prominence, and then to the very height of power. Similarly, Ravenheart had grown from the stronghold of a lesser legacy clan to one of the great citadels of humanity, sheltering hundreds of thousands of Awakened. And now, after the Chain of Nightmares, it was home to millions of mundane humans as well. The citadel itself was a magnificent palace that stood on the slope of a snowy mountain, perched at the very edge of a bottomless chasm. The legend said that it had been cut from pure white jade once, but after enduring the wrath of the surrounding volcanoes for thousands of years, it turned entirely black, as if made from obsidian glass. Still, contrasted against pristine white snow, its sublime beauty had only become more tantalizing. A titanic stone bridge spanned the vast chasm between the mountain and the volcano standing opposite it, connecting the two branches of the mountain chain like a road meant for giants. Its black pillars were decorated with intricate engravings, and the scale of the construct defied reason. These days, the members of the Song clan inhabited the frozen obsidian palace, while the titanic bridge had become a town for the awakened warriors who could withstand the cold. The city itself had been built on the slopes of the volcano, where its warmth protected the mundane citizens of Ravenheart from the inhumanly harsh climate of the snowy region. They did not have to be wary of sudden eruptions either, because Queen Song and her transcendent daughters could protect them from any disaster. Ravenheart was a harsh place, but it was also an incredibly beautiful place, and therefore, life here was harsh, but also thriving. The surrounding lands had long been cleared of the truly dangerous nightmare creatures, but they were more dangerous than the heartland of the Dream Realm, where Bastion stood. Many abominations still dwelled in the snowy mountains, and the environment itself was deadly for those unprepared to face its cruelty. At the same time, there was a lot of fertile soil in the lowlands, which had been generously fertilized by volcanic ash. There was also geothermal heat, countless hot springs, and precious minerals of all kinds everywhere around. The people who had been evacuated here from Antarctica found their lives turning stark and intense, but also intensely enjoyable. If one grew accustomed to the solemn and eerie power of Queen Song, of course, which they quickly had. Stone worms had very bad hearing, but could feel the smallest vibration spreading through the ground. She coughed quietly, then answered in a whisper.
What? Of course not, respected teacher. Your pupil would never dare to do something that disloyal.
The quiet voice responded dubiously. Really? Well, good. You should hurry up, though. The wind is changing. Rain uttered a stifled curse and slowly rose to one knee. It was time to kill another dormant monster.
How many have I killed already?
More than any sleeper she knew, certainly. And more than many young awakened in Ravenheart as well, despite being mundane. But she still had to be extremely cautious. She couldn't allow a single mistake. It was just like how her teacher always said. One mistake was all it took to turn into a corpse. And becoming a corpse in Ravenheart was just too creepy. Granted, teacher would probably save her if something happened. Probably. Right? Rain rose to one knee in one smooth motion and raised her bow. Flakes of ash rained from it like black snow, dancing gracefully in the wind. In one heartbeat, she took out an arrow from her quiver and knocked it on the string. Another heartbeat, and she strained her muscles to draw the bow. The composite alloy resisted her pull, but swiftly surrendered to her strength and perfect form, both of which were the result of arduous training and countless hours of practice. Her bow was not a fancy memory weapon. It was quite mundane, made from alloy and filament, more powerful than such weapons used to be, but nowhere near its enchanted counterparts. It was not a compound bow either. More than that, even as far as recurve bows went, hers was on the weaker side. But there was nothing Rain could do about it. There were alloy bows of monstrous power out there, but they were meant to be used by the awakened. With her pitiful mundane strength, she wouldn't even be able to draw one, let alone do so swiftly and reliably. As for compound bows, while they offered increased draw weight and other advantages, that was only good on paper. In reality, there was more to a weapon than its power. How reliable was it? Was it easy to carry? Would it endure the wilds? Could it be cared for and maintained in harsh conditions? And so on. Awakened did not have to think about such things, but Rain did. And thanks to her teacher, she had learned all about these matters. Each piece of her equipment was picked out thoughtfully.
Yeah, not at all, because I simply can't use anything better.
The inner layer of Rain's kit consisted of a military bodysuit, the kind the soldiers of the evacuation army had used in Antarctica. It could repair itself and regulate the temperature of her body, which was a necessity here in Ravenheart, where lethal cold and blistering heat somehow coexisted in appalling harmony. Granted, the self-repair function of the bodysuit was practically exhausted after years of extensive use, and she'd had to patch it up by hand on several occasions. Her teacher was weirdly good with needle and thread, for some reason. Imparting that knowledge on his reluctant student, she wore leather pants on top of the bodysuit, made from the hide of an awakened beast, as well as knee-high boots of the same material. The rest of her clothes consisted of a perfectly mundane Henley wool vest and a military jacket with a manually reinforced lining. There were a few pieces of armor supplementing her modest ensemble as well: alloy bracers and shin guards, a leather chest guard, and a jointed shoulder guard. As a respectful and dutiful pupil, Rain had no choice but to obey her teacher. She held her breath and took aim. Time slowed down to a crawl. Rain moved her bow slightly, accounting for the wind, and then relaxed her fingers, allowing them to slide off the string. Relieved from terrible tension, her alloy bow propelled the arrow forward with dire force. The string struck against her chest guard like a whip. The falling ash swirled, disturbed by the violent turbulence. 100 meters away, the stone worm toppled to the ground in a mess of long limbs. The arrow had dove into its circular maw, piercing the creature's brain. Sadly, stone worms had several independent brains. Before Rain had time to blink, the abomination rolled on the ground and shot toward her like a revolting flesh torpedo. It covered half of the distance between them in what felt like a split second. A cloud of ash rose into the air in its wake, spreading outward like a wave of boiling darkness. Before it could cover the remaining distance, though, a second arrow struck it. It had only taken Rain that long to draw her bow again, adjust her aim, and let the arrow fly. Even though hitting a moving target was endlessly more difficult, let alone such a fast one, the second arrow unerringly penetrated the creature's maw again. This time, it went in at a shallow angle, hitting the stoneworm's spine. The abomination stumbled, but continued barreling toward Rain. She blinked.
Crap.
Dropping the bow, she hurriedly picked up a long javelin that had been laying under the ash. Rain's weapon of choice was a bow. However, that did not mean that she was only versed in using a bow. Her teacher insisted that a ranged weapon was only good if one could keep the enemy at range, and in the dream realm, not even saints could guarantee something like that. Therefore, she was proficient not only with ranged weapons, but also with a wide range of weapons. Rain was nothing if not resourceful. By the time she grabbed the javelin and jumped to her feet, the stone worm was almost upon her. With fetid blood spilling from its torn maw, the horrid creature raised its front limbs to slice her into pieces, and suddenly disappeared from view. The pit Rain had dug up and covered with branches might not have been deep, but it was perfectly placed to stop the charge of a mindless monster. There was a great benefit in being able to handle a multitude of weapons, but there was an even greater benefit in always being prepared. Her teacher had hammered that simple principle into her head a long time ago. Before the stone worm could recover from suddenly dropping through the ash, the heavy javelin struck it with all the force she could muster. Its white scales were broken by the wide spearhead, and the abominable monster let out a piercing screech. Rain paled a little and finally drew her sword. The enemy was severely wounded, but it was not dead yet. A mess of hideous flesh and thin limbs staggered out of the pit, only to be met by the blade of the Tachi. Rain severed the front limbs of the sluggish monster, then delivered a ruthless slash across its scaly neck, putting a gash into it. A few more precise strikes and well-timed dodges, and the abomination finally grew motionless. Only half of its vile body managed to crawl out of the shallow pit, and was now laying on the ash. Rain slumped and grabbed her knees, panting heavily. She could feel a trickle of foreign essence seeping into her soul, and a river of adrenaline coursing through her blood.
Damn it.
Then a voice resounded behind her.
You have slain a dormant monster, stone worm. Your shadow grows stronger.
Turning around, she threw a dark look at her teacher, who'd finally deigned to crawl out of her shadow in all his shameless splendor.
What the hell are you on about?
The young man who was standing behind her, wearing light armor woven out of dark silk, looked away in embarrassment.
Don't mind me. Just something I used to hear often.
Rain took a deep breath and turned away with a stoic expression on her pale but beautiful face.
I am definitely going to kill him one day.
Was it possible to kill a ghost? Rain's teacher was a strange existence. Usually he resided in her shadow, only showing up when no one else was around. At first, she thought that she had gone insane and was hallucinating. But after spending some time with the mysterious apparition, Rain slowly realized that it was real. And not only that, but also immensely powerful. Luckily, the apparition was mostly benevolent and did not seem to harbor any ill will toward her. On the contrary, he treated Rain with something that resembled familial affection. It was almost as if he was the spirit of her distant ancestor. She did not think that her family had such an ancestor, though. But then again, Rain was adopted and didn't know much about her biological parents, so it might have been possible that there was an eccentric dark deity in her family tree. Her teacher did indeed look a bit like her, a much more glamorous, handsome, and male version of her, to be precise.
Teacher, tell me the truth. You're not an evil god, are you?
Of course not.
Really?
Sure. I mean, the blood of an ancient demon does flow in my veins, and I did devour the alabaster phalanx of a nebulous deity after being cast down into the darkness of a bottomless abyss, and technically I am indeed the master of a lightless fragment that was torn from a divine realm. But an evil god? Preposterous.
I see.
I mean, I'm a demigod at best. In short, after a while Rain had stopped asking questions. She felt that even if she had not gone mad yet, she definitely would if she continued. So she just lived her life and endured the harsh training, as well as the odd and eerie quirks of her mysterious teacher. Despite blaming him for not getting a chance to challenge the first nightmare, Rain knew that his guidance had saved her life on numerous occasions. She had grown much stronger and more capable under his mentorship, too. After a while, she had grown accustomed to his company and even found comfort in it. Not right now, though. Right now, she was seriously considering exercising him.
Hey, Rain, why are you spacing out?
She flinched and looked at her teacher, feeling slightly embarrassed. He shook his head.
Go on, harvest that stone worm before the queen takes it.
Rain stared at the revolting corpse of the dead abomination, sighed, and jumped down into the pit. Pulling a sharp hunting knife from the sheath attached to the small of her back, she grimaced and got to work, mumbling,
Before the queen takes it. Ha! Why would she take a measly stoneworm, as if she has need of such a weak and ugly servant?
Despite the fact that Rain's clash with the stoneworm had only lasted a dozen seconds, she was tired. Not only because she had tracked the creature down for a long time first, spending hours to prepare the ambush, but also because those few seconds of absolute mental concentration and daunting physical exertion took a lot out of her. That was how it went every time. If a mundane human wanted to face a nightmare creature, anything less than giving it your all, and then some, meant death. Not that there were a lot of mundanes going out of their way to fight abominations. Not a lot of those who lived to tell the tale, at least. In a sense, Rain was an anomaly. Sadly, the harsh physical demands of the hunt were not over after her prey was dead. Grimacing, Rain gripped her sharp hunting knife and went about dressing the stoneworm. Its flesh was wiry and tough. Its scales were even tougher. Even with her knife having been forged from mystical steel, it took all of Rain's strength to rend the dead abomination, especially because she didn't want to become drenched in its blood. Not only because that would have been icky, but also because the stench of blood could attract other nightmare creatures.
Curse it all.
She worked up a sweat, eventually taking off her jacket and vest and rolling up the sleeves of her Henley. The ash continued to rain from the sky, smearing her ivory skin like black ink. Her teacher, meanwhile, sat comfortably on a rock and observed her with a content expression, not even trying to help.
Bastard.
Cursing again? Rain, a proper young lady should act with modesty, poise, and decorum. You were such a well-mannered girl when we met. Where did you even pick up these bad habits? Who taught you such foul language? Tell me and I'll beat the crap out of the damned bastard.
She paused for a moment, glared at him, and then returned to her work without saying a word.
Stop pouting.
I'm not pouting.
Rain collected the abomination's sharp fangs. Those could be used to fashion arrowheads, then moved to its limbs and separated the stone-like blades from its joints. The blades could be sold in Ravenheart for a good price, or bartered for other materials. However, the true treasure was the hide of the stoneworm. Although it was merely a dormant monster, the scales of these creatures were lightweight and tough. The awakened who had not earned a good armor-type memory yet often used them to fashion scale mail. Those with plenty of coins could afford something better, of course, but there were many of those who couldn't.
Something tells me that it is not soon enough, so we'll need to hurry up. You have to hunt another awakened abomination. A strong one as well.
Rain shivered, remembering the last time she faced an awakened nightmare creature. That clash had almost cost her life. Had that one been strong in her teacher's eyes? She gave him a long look.
You know that we can simply buy an awakened soul shard or two. It will be expensive, sure, but my parents can help. Wait, actually, why do we need to buy them? Teacher, you're so great and awesome. Just do your thing. Tell a bunch of powerful abominations to be gone, and let me collect the shards.
He stared at her dubiously and coughed.
Well, sure, you're right. Your teacher is awesome. I can kill the abominations for you.
Rain's eyes gleamed.
Really?
But he was not done talking.
And while I'm at it, why don't I awaken for you as well? Should I also feed you from a spoon, like a little baby?
He scoffed.
Let me tell you, a baby I knew transcended before learning how to walk, and he didn't even have me as a teacher. Come to think of it, what's your excuse, huh? What do you have to say for yourself?
Rain glared at him hatefully, then looked away.
Forget I said anything.
She cleaned her weapons, sheathed her knife, and fastened the rolled hide of the stoneworm to her pack. Finally ready to depart, Rain hoisted it onto her shoulders and started to walk. It was time to head back to Ravenheart. Rain made a point of using light equipment, and yet she carried considerable weight. There were her clothes and armor, her bow, a quiver of arrows, the javelin she used, her sword, the hunting knife attached to her belt, and another knife hidden in her boot. There was also plenty of stuff in her pack, and attached to her pack, everything she needed to hunt and survive in the wilderness. It would have been nice to simply summon and dismiss all these things when she needed them, but alas, Rain couldn't use memories. She couldn't even really use the memories that someone else had summoned and handed to her, because her soul did not have a core, and she was not a carrier of the nightmare spell. Weighed down by the additional burden of the stoneworm's hide and fangs, Rain felt miserable. It didn't help at all that Ravenheart was situated in the mountains. She was currently at the bottom of a deep gorge, not too far from the relatively flat area at the foot of the mountain chain where the farms feeding the city were located. There was a long and tough climb ahead of her. Using the javelin as a staff, Rain slowly made her way out of the gorge. Luckily, she was in good shape. Amazing shape, really. Her lithe and resilient body had been tempered by years of relentless training and was pretty much at the very limit of what mundane humans could achieve. In the past, Rain had trained extensively with private tutors. She had thought that her physical condition was stellar back then. She had known nothing. Under her teacher's harsh and prudent guidance, her physical state entered an entirely new territory. Her youthful body was strong, tenacious, and as nimble as that of a cat. Even the most elite athletes would have been rattled and green with envy if they witnessed what she was capable of. Not that it mattered. Any awakened could still blow her away with one half-hearted slap.
Whatever.
Sometimes, Rain was angry at her teacher for prohibiting her from challenging the first nightmare. But at the same time, she was thankful to him, not for her own sake, but on behalf of her parents. They had already lost one child to the nightmare spell. If she was alone, Rain would have gladly risked her life for the chance of becoming an awakened. But she could not bear the thought of putting her mom and dad through that suffering again. So, her teacher's promise to help her awaken without having to challenge a nightmare was like a glimmer of light in a sea of darkness. In any case, even though climbing mountains in terrible weather while carrying a heavy load was hard and miserable, she had long grown accustomed to it. As Rain ascended higher and higher, her teacher walked side by side with her, going over the events of the hunt. She had performed well and managed to kill the stoneworm without sustaining any injuries, but there were still things that could have been done better, and things that could have been done differently.
Maybe I shouldn't sell the blades we harvested from the stoneworm. Next time I can place them at the bottom of the pit like spikes.
That's a good idea, but don't rely on traps too much. This time the bastard ran straight, but next time you might not get so lucky. What were you going to do if the worm bypassed your pit?
Retreat to lure him into the second pit, of course. And anyway, was it really luck? I investigated the slope and found the wormholes, chose an ambush spot, and dug pits between the former and the latter. Beasts are stupid, so the enemy would have gone after me using the shortest path. Sure, it turned out to be a monster, a bit smarter, but still pretty dumb.
Her teacher's voice was glum. Rain grew quiet, lowering her javelin, and then took a step back to let the dead girl pass. A tiny sigh escaped from her lips. The closer the walking corpse drew, the better she could see the terrible wounds covering her frigid body. Eventually, unable to look, Rain turned away and furtively rubbed her eyes. The dead girl walked past them without showing any reaction, her bruised, pale face motionless, and slowly disappeared into the swirling snow. A few moments later, the wind erased her footprints, as if she had never existed. Rain and her teacher were left alone on the snowy slope. She sighed. The winter solstice had just passed recently.
Is she one of this year's sleepers?
He nodded. She must have died on the way to a citadel, so the queen took her.
Rain remained silent for a while, then sighed again. Queen Song held authority over the dead, so anything that died in her domain was taken by her. It wasn't rare to see the dead pilgrims walking through the snow. For some, the journey was long. For some, the journey was short. After reaching Ravenheart, they entered the ice caves under the palace and became the queen's servants. Queen Song was the queen of the living, but she was also the queen of the dead. That was why people in the sword domain derisively called her the Queen of Worms. The nickname was preposterous, of course. There were no worms in the ice halls, where the cold was so terrible that only the dead could survive. Rain stared in the direction where the taken girl had disappeared, considering if she should follow her. Following a pilgrim was safer because nightmare creatures tended to avoid them. But in the end, she decided to continue on her way. Seeing the dead girl was just too unnerving, because the perished sleeper reminded Rain of her own insolent aspirations to become a carrier of the nightmare spell against her teacher's wishes. If she had, would she have ended up walking frozen through the snow too? Eventually, Rain reached one of the roads leading from the lowlands to the city. These mountain roads had been in use from before the Chain of Nightmares. It was hard to remember now, after the population exploded to many millions, but it had been a great citadel even prior to that. The roads leading to the Great Bridge and the beautiful palace beyond it were actually thousands of years old. Granted, they had been in a state of desolation and disrepair when the Song clan made the ancient citadel their home. The awakened of the Great Legacy clan had restored them to their former glory, and the whole network was further expanded to account for the increased traffic in the past 4 years. Now, heavily protected road crews were far away from the citadel, building safe highways to other cities within the Song domain. Many awakened with utility aspects were participating in the construction, and many warriors were employed to defend the moving builder camps from the roving nightmare creatures. Rain had even tried to get hired for one of the crews, but no one wanted to employ a mundane fighter. The best they could do was remain polite and not laugh in her face. She couldn't really blame them. In any case, now that she had reached the wide and well-maintained road, the rest of the ascent would become much easier. There was probably a metaphor about the unnecessary hardships of walking the untrodden path somewhere in there, but Rain wasn't going to start complaining to her teacher again. He had retreated into her shadow anyway, unwilling to be seen by other people. Rain rested for a bit, quenched her thirst from a military canteen, and continued on her way. There were many people on the road, workers descending into the lowlands or returning from their shifts, Song warriors on patrols, caravans loaded with heavy cargo. Life was thriving, and the young city was boiling with activity. Rain had grown up in the vast human jungle of NQSC, so Ravenheart did not seem that large in comparison. However, it somehow felt much more vibrant. Its atmosphere was entirely different, as though everyone here was looking forward to the future, instead of trying not to think about it while being afraid of the past. There were no draft animals in the Dream Realm, or any other kind of cattle. However, here in Ravenheart, nightmare creatures were often used to pull wagons, plow the fields, and perform all kinds of labor-intensive or dangerous jobs. It was all thanks to Saint Song Yunbin, better known as Beastmaster. Funnily enough, the most terrifying of Kisong's daughters had also done the most to ease the lives of the citizens of Ravenheart. If not for her, the development of the city and the Song domain as a whole would have never been as fast or as explosive. Of course, it was still a bit creepy to be around the subjugated nightmare creatures, and one had to be cautious around them. Even enchanted by Beastmaster, they were dangerous beasts, so each had to be watched over by a trained handler. Looking at the wagon roll away, Rain sighed.
Saint Yunbin is amazing.
Her teacher's voice resounded from the shadows, sounding a bit wistful.
Oh, Beastmaster? Well, she's not bad, you know. She once asked me to run away with her. Of course, I refused. Your teacher is not someone who can be swayed by a pretty face.
Rain gave her shadow a dubious glance, but kept her remarks to herself. Grimacing, she carried her heavy pack and continued forward. The closer to the city she got, the more crowded the road became. There were more awakened patrolling it too, some even accompanied by echoes. The temperature slowly rose until it was warm enough for her to take off her coat. She even unbuttoned her jacket. By the time the distant cold sun was ready to disappear behind the horizon, Rain finally reached her destination. In front of her, built on the slope of the tall volcano, stood the gates of Ravenheart. From where Rain stood on the slope, she could see most of the city. Ravenheart was separated into 3 distinct districts. The largest by far was sprawled on the dark slope of the fuming volcano, protected from the merciless cold by its heat. This was where millions of mundane humans lived. Their homes were mostly built from black stone, so it seemed as though the entire city was a part of the mountain, intricately carved from its slope by some divine being. The second district was built on the grandiose stone bridge that stretched over a bottomless chasm toward a distant snowy mountain. It was much smaller than the first one, but still rather large. That bridge was home to most of the awakened citizens of Ravenheart, since only they could survive the bitter cold and the strong winds blowing across it. And finally, a sublime palace that seemed to be cut from obsidian glass stood at the opposite end of the great bridge. The palace was visible from anywhere in Ravenheart when the weather was good, its dark and ethereal beauty never failing to take one's breath away. That was where Queen Song and her clan lived, and where the gateway to the waking world was located. The Dream Gate, meanwhile, was located directly opposite the palace, on the slope of the volcano behind the mundane district. Supply shipments and new settlers arrived from it almost every day, lured by the promise of a better life. Rain spent a few moments enjoying the view of the city, then hurried to the gate. She couldn't wait to reach her den and climb under a warm blanket. There were a few familiar faces preparing to leave the city just as she was returning. A group of young awakened were gathered in front of the gate, all clad in enchanted armor and wielding memory weapons. A few of the young men seemed to be paying rapt attention to her. Rain sighed.
These guys again.
Her teacher didn't say anything, but she could feel an almost palpable scorn radiating from her shadow. One of the young awakened waved at her and smiled.
Rain, coming back from a hunt?
She lingered, trying to come up with a polite way to avoid a conversation. Sadly, her mind was blank. Eventually, Rain forced out a pale smile.
Oh yeah, I tracked down the nightmare creature that has been harassing one of the worms recently. A stone worm. Yeah, it's dead.
The young man stared at her somewhat intensely, wearing an expression that she struggled to discern.
Why does he always stare at me? I'm crazy, I know. No need to make your distaste so obvious.
To add insult to injury, the guy was very handsome, like all awakened were. He used to be one of the mundane humans that had relocated to Ravenheart, like her, but challenged the first nightmare last year. Being more or less the same age, they had known each other before, a little. But now, there was a great divide between their status and social standing. Rain walked away, leaving the annoying whispers behind.
I heard she went to
Passing through the city gates, she pursed her lips and complained to her teacher.
Why do those guys always stare at me and try to stir up trouble? Can't they just leave me alone?
Her teacher answered in an incredulous tone. You don't know? Rain raised an eyebrow.
Know what?
There was a long pause, and then her teacher chuckled. They stare at you because you're pretty. There's no one prettier than my little sister. She couldn't help but burst into laughter, making a few people give her strange looks.
Right. Perhaps talking to myself in the middle of the street is not the best idea, especially considering that they already think I'm crazy.
Rain shook her head derisively.
Who, me? There are thousands of female awakened in Ravenheart, and each of them is prettier than me. I doubt an awakened guy would ever give me a second look.
Of course, she knew that she was not too bad, really, appearance-wise, by mundane standards, but the effect of the awakening on one's body was simply too great.
They have such smooth and silky skin, and no calluses. A weathered brute like me cannot compete.
Her teacher scoffed quietly in the shadows. Gods, how dense are you, girl? He remained silent for a few moments, and then suddenly gasped. Oh, wait, eye candy. There was another long pause, and then a dejected sigh. We are definitely siblings. The outer wall of the mundane district was thick and tall. Rain passed through the gateway, still thinking about what her teacher had said.
Pretty? I'm pretty? He was teasing me, right? That scoundrel. Maybe if he allowed me to have a mirror at home, I wouldn't have to ask.
Her thoughts were interrupted by an awakened warrior who suddenly appeared in her way. His equipment was visibly more potent than that of the young men and women whom she had met outside, and his face was much more mature. Unlike those inexperienced greenhorns, he was a true warrior of song. This way, please. Rain obediently followed the awakened to the side, where a cohort of veterans like him was keeping a watchful eye on everyone entering the city. They were led by a stunningly beautiful woman wearing an enchanted robe of fine wine-colored silk, a master. There was no sign of Rain's teacher. As if he had dove deeper into the shadows, she approached the beautiful woman and bowed respectfully. The Ascended smiled.
Oh, it's you, little sister. Rain, was it? Please, don't move.
A torrent of ethereal sparks swirled around her hand, and a red flower appeared on her palm. Its dark petals seemed to be glistening with dew, and it emanated a pleasant fragrance. The woman raised her hand, as if offering the flower to Rain. Of course, Rain did not take it. Instead, she froze and looked at the crimson blossom solemnly. A few moments passed in tense silence, then a few more. She glanced at the beautiful master. The woman was still smiling, but her eyes were cold and full of dark something.
Murder math.
That's what her teacher called it. Rain remembered the strange term well because he often lamented the fact that she seemed to lack that cold quality, whatever it was. In any case, the powerful Ascended was calmly calculating how to kill her should the need arise. It was more than a little bit unnerving. Luckily, nothing of the sort ended up happening. A dozen seconds later, the Ascended smile finally reached her eyes. Moving her hand, she dismissed the red flower and gestured for Rain to leave.
Welcome back. Have a nice evening.
Rain bowed one more time and walked away. Rain nodded.
Sure, there are mirrors like that everywhere in Ravenheart.
He sighed. They would have asked the mirror to help. That is already more than you should know, so don't ask anything else. Rain couldn't help but throw a startled glance at her shadow.
They would have asked the mirror to help? Don't tell me.
Did her teacher's irrational fear of mirrors have an actual reason behind it? Unsure what to think, Rain dove into the bustling labyrinth of Ravenheart streets. Since the mundane district was sprawled on the slope of the volcano, it was divided into many vertical levels, not unlike the terrace neighborhood in NQSC, where she had grown up. Granted, the terraces that had been carved on the black slope were of a much greater scale, supporting numerous buildings and housing millions of people. The lower levels were where most of the work took place, while the higher levels were mostly residential. Additionally, the more affluent neighborhoods were situated closer to the Great Bridge, while the poorer ones were situated further from it. Rain's parents lived in one of the former, while her own den was in one of the latter. Actually, It was not too far from the city gate, which felt like a blessing today. Dead tired, Rain found her way home, unlocked the door, and finally dropped the heavy pack. A few minutes later, she crawled under her warm fur blanket and closed her eyes. The moment her head hit the pillow, all thoughts disappeared from it. Rain yawned, curled into a ball, and said drowsily,
Good night, teacher.
He responded a moment later,
You too. Sleep tight.
Her teacher's familiar voice was like a lullaby. Knowing that he would protect her if anything happened at night, Rain allowed herself to relax and comfortably fell into the embrace of sleep. Rain was woken up by the delicious smell of breakfast. She spent a few minutes in sweet drowsiness, enjoying the warmth of her bed and the softness of her pillow, then yawned and sat up. Immediately after, she winced.
Ouch.
Her whole body was sore, which was not at all unfamiliar, but still unpleasant. The rigors of hunting nightmare creatures were not something a mundane body could handle easily, so she needed a few days of rest to recover from the fatigue. Unlike the awakened, who could bounce back from straining themselves to the extreme in a matter of hours. Whimpering pitifully, Rain climbed from under the furs and performed a few simple stretching exercises. When her stiff muscles relaxed a little, she sighed and finally went to the makeshift kitchen situated at the opposite side of her den, where the tantalizing aroma of freshly cooked food was coming from. Rain's lair consisted of one rather spacious room and a modest bathroom. It was mostly below ground and did not get a lot of light, since the only window was situated near the ceiling. As a result, most of the space was drowning in deep shadows. It was also one of the reasons why the rent was so cheap. Her bed took one of the corners, while the kitchen took another. The largest portion of the room was used for training, and lastly, the whole part near the entrance was meant for storing hunting spoils. The workbench where she mended her belongings and crafted new equipment was also there, littered with various tools, materials, and feathers for fletching arrows. It was a bit messy and a bit too Spartan. Few people would have wanted to live in a place like that, and Rain wasn't really living here either. Her time was usually divided equally between the den and her much more comfortable family home. Staying with her parents was nicer, but having a place of her own also felt good. Not to mention provided endless convenience. She wouldn't want her mom and dad to faint every time she came back to Ravenheart caked in blood and covered in bruises. They were already very disapproving of every decision she had made in the past few years. But what could she do? She couldn't really say that her shadow talked to her, teaching her how to kill nightmare creatures and telling her to do strange things. Rain was already an adult and could make her own decisions now anyway. She was 20.
Eat your breakfast before it gets cold, young lady. And don't forget your vegetables.
Her teacher's voice made Rain flinch. Pouting slightly, she sat down at the counter and moved the plate closer. Her sour expression did not last, though, swiftly replaced by delight. Rain was very hungry after the hunt. In just a few minutes, all the delicious things her teacher had prepared were gone.
A new road crew? Strange.
It seemed that the royal clan was assembling a new road construction crew, but its scale seemed much greater than all the previous ones. The pay was also much higher, which made the offer extremely alluring. However, it seemed like hazard pay. The description implied a higher than usual danger level in the new job. Strangely enough, there was no mention of what region of the Dream Realm the new road was meant to connect to. More than that, from what Rain knew, there were already crews building roads to all neighboring citadels, so where would this new one lead exactly? In any case, that was none of her business. Rain had no intention of trying to get hired as a worker, and no one would employ her as a guard. Still, a lot of Awakened would probably leave the city once the construction started, so that was something to account for. Deep in thought, she left the town hall and headed to the lower levels of the district, where the largest market was located. Descending a set of steep stairs cut into the dark slope of the volcano, she asked in a confused tone,
Teacher, doesn't that new road crew seem strange? Where are they building a road to?
He remained silent for a while, then laughed quietly.
Strange? No, not at all. As for where they are going, that's simple enough to guess. They are going east.
Rain frowned. East? There was nothing much east of Ravenheart, only the death zones. Granted, the sword domain lay beyond them, but that didn't change the fact. What was the point of building a road to a wild and deadly region of the Dream Realm? Her teacher was not making any sense, which, admittedly, happened quite often.
He's just trying to sound smart to cover up his lack of knowledge. How clumsy.
Smiling, Rain shook her head and continued descending the stairs. The market was a large and lively place. Numerous stalls were set up in the open, with more respectable storefronts visible here and there. Almost anything could be bought here, starting with minerals harvested from the carcasses of nightmare creatures and ending with rare items brought over from the waking world via the Dream Gate. Weapons, home appliances, fashionable clothes, crafting tools, whatever one needed, it could probably be found here. Of course, items of true quality were sold in other, more exclusive places. Some of the elite shops were not even situated in the mundane district, so potential customers had to brave the chilling cold of the bridge or send awakened retainers to complete the purchase. Still, most citizens of Ravenheart visited the market when they needed something. Rain knew the place well and swiftly made her way to the area where the harvested materials were sold. After haggling with a familiar merchant, she sold off the stoneworm hide and weighed her coin purse in her hand, full of satisfaction. With this payment and the reward she had received in the town hall, Rain was flush with money. Best of all, she had managed to bring the stoneworm down without suffering any wounds, so she didn't even need to hire a healer. Healers were rare and therefore prohibitively expensive. Awakened warriors were the ones habitually sustaining injuries, but they also had a lot of spending power. Rain did not, so most of the money she had made in the past years ended up going toward her medical expenses, but not today. Whistling joyously, she left the market and made her way to one of the many public baths in Ravenheart. Due to the volatile nature of the region, there were numerous hot springs here, and soaking in them had quickly become the favorite pastime of the citizens. If there was such a thing as tourism in the Dream Realm, the capital of Song would definitely have been a popular destination due to its hot springs.
Maybe in the future.
Before entering the bathhouse, Rain stopped in a dark alley behind it. A shadow separated from her and settled in the darkness, then waved casually. Leaving her teacher alone, she proceeded inside to enjoy some privacy. Soon, having taken a shower, Rain submerged her weary body into the hot water and felt the many pains bothering her dissolve in it. There were many mystical minerals in the mountains surrounding Ravenheart, so these springs were supposed to have healing effects. She didn't know how true that statement was exactly, but visiting the baths was definitely both pleasant and reinvigorating. She had mostly come here to clean herself, though. It wouldn't do to come home covered in sweat, grime, and the stench of blood. The cleaner and fresher Rain looked in front of her parents, the less they would worry about her, so she made a habit of visiting a bathhouse after every hunt. Still, it wouldn't harm anyone if she soaked in the hot water a bit more.
But my cousins are in the sword domain. You must tell them to be careful then.
Rain shook her head and slid deeper into the water to block out the hushed conversation.
Aren't they being ridiculous?
Strangely enough, that ridiculous rumor was quite persistent. She had heard some version of it many times already, almost as if someone was spreading it on purpose. On the other hand, some hostility between the two domains was inevitable. They were both still dependent on the waking world after all, which meant that there was a competition for resources, and competition bred resentment, especially when one's livelihood was at stake. Resentment, in turn, bred these kinds of rumors. Plus, a vast majority of mundane humans living in the Dream Realm had come from Antarctica. They were traumatized and anxious, sometimes letting fear get the better of them. In any case, the public opinion of the sword domain was slowly changing for the worse in Ravenheart. There was nothing like that 4 years ago, but now such sentiments were not uncommon.
Why can't they just be happy that someone else is doing well?
Rain threw the two scaredy women out of her mind and tried to enjoy herself in peace. Eventually, she emerged from the bathhouse, looking as smooth and pink as a newborn baby. The rugged leather outfit was stuffed into her pack, replaced by much more casual, neat and tidy civilian clothes. The frightful monster huntress was gone. replaced by an innocent and lovely young woman. If the group of young awakens she had met at the city gate saw her, they would probably not believe their eyes. Feeling a bit strange in her simple dress, Rain put on an ash coat made from light, beautifully embroidered fabric. Pulling down its hood, she went to the dark alley, retrieved her teacher, and headed toward the upper levels of the city. She was going home. Rain stopped at a popular bakery and spent a good chunk of her coins on a set of delicious pastries. Her younger siblings were moody teenagers now, but she still liked to pamper them when she got the chance, or at least try to. Teenagers, sadly, were not easy to pamper.
They're probably off to school already.
Letting out a sigh, Rain walked along the steep streets of Ravenheart while enjoying the weather. It was on the cooler side today, but the air was crisp and clear, not at all like the stale air of NQSC. There was no ash falling from the sky either, so the breathtaking vista of the sprawling vertical city was not obscured. Across the Great Stone Bridge, a lonely peak pierced the sky, its slopes covered in snow. The beautiful palace of the Queen was hidden by a blizzard, though, so Rain could not enjoy its dark awe and splendor. Her thoughts slowly drifted to the awakened nightmare creature she was meant to find and slay. What class would it be? How long would the preparations take her? What strategies would she employ, and what contingencies should she put in place? Would she even survive that fight? Thinking about that, somberly, she ascended rather high. Now she only had to get closer to the bridge, and she would be home. But before Rain reached the neighborhood where her parents lived, she noticed a crowd of people gathered on one of the scenic observation platforms. She stopped to listen to what they were talking about, curious to find out what the matter was. Their voices sounded excited. "Are you sure that he's coming back today?"
I'm sure. He already delivered the last of this year's sleepers to the cities in the south. There's nothing left for him to do but return. I'm so excited. I missed the day he departed, so I didn't see.
"I saw. I want to see it again, though." Rain tilted her head, confused. Who were they waiting for? Her teacher suddenly mumbled in a subdued tone. "Gods, how is it even worse now?" Sadly, the government saints spent most of their time in the waking world, and when they came to the dream realm, each was assigned to a specific region. Effie was far away in Bastion, so they had not seen each other in a while. The same went for Lady Nephis and Cassia, both of whom had been kind to Rain in the past. Of course, all these renowned people might have been transcendent warriors, but which one of them could claim to be a dark deity? In a sense, it was weird knowing her teacher topped all her other strange acquaintances combined. In any case, Rain was just that, a passing acquaintance. In the lives of these exalted figures, she doubted they really remembered her, let alone had thought about her sometimes. Why would they think about an insignificant, mundane girl? Her teacher, on the other hand, thought about her too much. It was hard to escape his nagging.
Maybe I'll meet them again after becoming an awakened.
Throwing one last glance into the distance, where the graceful figure of the black dragon had disappeared, Rain turned away and continued on her way home. Soon she reached a pretty two-story house, opened the door, and walked inside with a bright smile.
Mom, Dad, I'm home.
Unknown to Rain, the figure of her teacher lingered outside, staring across the great bridge from the shadows. Just at that moment, the snowstorm subsided, and the beautiful palace of black obsidian revealed itself on the steep mountain slope. Sunny studied its breathtaking beauty for a few moments, and then pursed his lips a little. His gaze was dark. Jade Palace. Being that close to another of Ariel's creations was rather uncomfortable. Of course, it was also one of the reasons he had come to Ravenheart. A few days before, far away from the harsh splendor of Ravenheart, Sunny was looking at Cassia while hiding his emotions behind a polite smile.
Oh, and by the way,
Her tone was neutral.
happy birthday.
For a split second, his mask cracked. Sunny's face did not move, but his gaze changed. For a short moment, his eyes were much deeper and darker than before. The lightless depth contained within them was much too vast, much too cold, and much too unfathomable to fit the image of a harmless shopkeeper. He froze, a storm of emotions raging in his heart. For a second, Sunny was stunned, not knowing what to say. The shadows stirred, but then he quickly composed himself.
Why, thank you. But how did you know?
An irrational but desperate hope had ignited in his chest, trying to burn away his judgment. A hope that someone, anyone, remembered him, that Cassia did. The thought of it was both blindingly sweet and ruthlessly painful because it was impossible. The fateless attribute, as he had called it, was thorough, so Sunny discarded that futile hope and hid his rattled state. How had she known that today was his birthday, though? Maybe, just maybe. Cassia was facing him, remaining silent. Her smile slowly dimmed, replaced by a strange and solemn expression. Sunny felt uncomfortable because her eyes were hidden by the blue fabric, but he did not show it. Come to think of it, he had not noticed it immediately, but Cassia looked a little strange. How could he describe it? She seemed a little haggard. Of course, a stranger would not have noticed, blinded by the stunning beauty of the blind seer. But to Sunny, she looked out of sorts. Her clothes, which had always been neat and tidy, were a little messy. Her hair was like a waterfall of pale gold, but it did not seem properly combed. There were signs of fatigue on her delicate face. Much more importantly, there was a hint of restless intensity to her, which had never been there before, as if Cassia was not quite stable, having lost her innate sense of composed balance. He coughed.
Well, why not? My house might not be able to fly like your citadel, but it can walk, and it's convenient.
The more important question was, what did she see when looking at him? Weaver's mask was all the way in Godgrave, and while the nebulous mantle could hide his presence, it was nowhere near as potent at deflecting divination. Nevertheless, Sunny was not worried. He was mostly certain that Cassia's powers were based on a subconscious ability to perceive the strings of fate and sense when they were trembling. Since there were no strings of fate connected to him anymore, she should be powerless against him. As if to confirm his words, Cassia spoke calmly.
Do you know what I sense when I look at you, though? Nothing. You are like a black void, completely empty.
Sunny raised an eyebrow.
That is not something a man wants to hear on his birthday, Saint Cassia.
She did not seem to have heard his words, continuing in the same tone.
But this is perfect. This is exactly what I've been looking for. Oh, Master Sunless, you seem to be strangely well informed about my abilities, considering that you are not at all surprised to hear these things. Well, just in case, let me tell you I used to be able to see the future.
Huh? He hesitated for a while, a little startled by that statement.
Used to?
Cassia nodded.
Yes, this ability of mine has been in complete disarray after my third nightmare. Not just mine, actually. All awakened with a high affinity to fate are suffering a reduction in their ability to discern the future. Not that there are a lot of us. It is almost as if fate itself has been thrown into chaos.
Sunny forced out a smile.
How terrible.
She remained silent for a while, seemingly distracted. Then she said with a subtle hint of relief,
Yes, it has been rather terrible, and I've been trying to find the cause for the past 4 years, without any success, so the message that I seem to have sent myself made me think that you might be of help, and won't just think that I'm crazy.
Cassie paused, then faced him and said tensely,
Master Sunless, how would you react if I told you that there was a man-shaped hole in the world?
Sunny remained motionless for a few moments. The expression on Cassia's face was tense and somber, defiant even, as if she was saying something that she had said many times already, only to be dismissed, or even branded as a lunatic. Sunny knew the feeling. He sighed, then pointed to the nearest table.
Have a seat. I sense that this is going to be a long conversation, so let me make you something to drink.
He took a step back and retreated to the kitchen. He could have manifested an avatar instead, but really Sunny needed a few minutes to collect himself.
A man-shaped hole in the world.
Indeed, to someone else his absence would have felt like that. It was just that no one was able to remember witnessing the inexplicable void where a man named Sunless used to be. Cassia, however, although she didn't seem to know the solution, she had somehow pieced the problem together. She knew that something was wrong with her, with everyone else, and with the world itself. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not prove it. She couldn't even remember trying to solve the problem. That must have been maddening, not to mention the fact that her ability to perceive the future had suddenly betrayed her, leaving Cassia without another of her senses. The past 4 years must have been rough for her, and yet, selfishly, Sonny was glad. He shamefully felt a warmth in his heart. He wasn't quite remembered, but it felt so good for his absence to be witnessed by someone at least. A few minutes later, he emerged from the kitchen with a teapot and a couple cups. Cassia was sitting at one of the tables, waiting. Her exquisitely beautiful face was calm, but he could feel a hint of agitation underneath that facade. Placing a cup in front of her, Sonny poured the tea and sat down.
A man-shaped hole. You might want to explain, Saint Cassia.
She took the cup and tilted her head a little. At that moment, Sonny realized that he had made a mistake. In an attempt to hide his rattled state, he had been acting much too calm throughout their conversation. No master would have been that calm in front of Song of the Fallen, let alone while hearing her say such outrageous things. He was suddenly unhappy with himself.
What a glaring oversight.
Since deceit was his craft, Sonny felt ashamed. Cassia touched the cup and traced its shape with her finger. When she spoke, her voice sounded even calmer than his.
Actually, it's not that strange. All of us, the members of Changing Stars cohort, have long realized that something had happened to us in the third nightmare. There are things that don't quite make sense, as if there are gaps in our memory. No, not gaps. It's like parts of our memories are corrupted, not in the everlasting void kind of way, but rather in a very mundane way, like what happens with old communicators.
Sonny stared at her silently. His silence prompted her to continue.
It's that the missing pieces form a person, someone who was there with us in the Tomb of Ariel, and maybe even earlier than that, a man who has been cut from the world, as if he had never existed, someone who was precious to us, to me.
She leaned forward, almost overturning her tea.
So, Master Sunless?
Before she could continue, he asked neutrally,
You say that the missing pieces form a person, but why are you so sure that it is a man? It might very well be a woman, no?
Cassia remained silent for a moment, then said tensely,
Because I think that you are that man.
Then she clenched her fists.
Are you?
Sonny did not answer for a while. Eventually, he sighed and answered, his voice even.
Yes.
Then he took a sip of tea and smiled bitterly.
But it doesn't matter if I confirm it. You won't remember anyway.
Cassia continued to lean forward. A stunned expression contorted her delicate face for a moment, then disappeared, replaced by momentary confusion and then tense anticipation.
So, are you?
Sonny turned away, hiding an ugly grimace. There was no point. It was not as if he had not tried to confess his existence to the people he knew before. He had, on several occasions, but just like his past, they could not retain the information about his connection to their lost memories of him. His confessions were destined to be forgotten, just like he had been. Funnily enough, he could admit to being Rain's brother, because her neighbor, Sonny, never had, and the concept of an older brother was thus not connected to her memories of him. He sighed and answered again.
Yes, I am.
Sonny waited for a moment. After Cassia had forgotten his answer, and before she could ask the question again, he interrupted her.
Instead of that, do you want to tell me more about that memory you want me to make? Is it a weapon?
Sonny tried to evade the question a few more times, but it was too important to Cassia. She stubbornly returned to it, no matter what he said, forgetting his answers a few moments later. Watching her lost expression was eerie and a little heartbreaking, like talking to someone suffering from dementia.
So, tell me, are you?
Sonny reminded himself to be patient. There were many suitable ways to prevent her from voicing the question. He just needed to find the correct one.
Yes, I am, but...
Cassia was stunned, then confused, then tense once more.
Maybe I should distract her with a revelation or two about what is going on in
Ravenheart. However, in the end, he did not have to. Somehow, Cassia did not repeat herself again. Instead, she shifted slightly, reached for her teacup, and traced its shape with her finger. Her face froze, and she fell quiet. After a few moments of silence, Cassia said evenly, "My tea is cold." Sunny tilted his head a little, then his eyes gleamed in the darkness. It seemed that there was no need to guide her away from the question after all.
So soon?
Cassia was smart. She could not remember that which was forgotten, but she noticed the change in the temperature of her tea. Therefore, instead of remembering, she simply deduced that something had been erased from her memory. The gears of her formidable mind were spinning now, connecting the negative space in her memory with the details of the conversation they were having, observing the void and inferring its meaning. Knowing Cassia, there were countless conjectures being formed in her head. Dozens of theories were being built, scrutinized, and discarded. Only those that could not be effectively disproven remained, leading to several parallel branches of assumptions. Those assumptions were then pitted against each other, turning into conclusions. The conclusions were used to extrapolate what exactly she had forgotten.
Too smart, maybe.
It was a little scary. Sunny did not say anything, carefully exploring his own emotions. If he was right, then Cassia not only knew that a person was missing from the world, but also deduced that he was that person, or at least connected to them. She would not be sure, but suspected strongly. And he had come closer to being known to someone than he had ever been since leaving the nightmare. Of course, there was a vast difference between being a suspicion and being a memory. But it was precisely because Cassia's inference was based solely on deduction and not remembrance that she could retain it. The taste of his tea was suddenly incredibly fragrant. Sunny drank it silently. His smile did not falter.
She has already connected me to the exploration report on the tomb of Ariel and guessed that I was in the nightmare with them. Damn it, I shouldn't have published it.
But he did not really regret his actions. That report was both for Teacher Julius and Ananka, so it was worth the trouble. Sunny chuckled, then asked with a hint of amusement in his voice,
"What's in it for me?"
Cassia leaned back and remained silent for a few moments. She might have guessed that he was the person she had been looking for, but she had no idea who he was. What were his motives, desires, and convictions? What was his past, and what was his vision of the future? What could she offer him to gain his cooperation? She couldn't even be sure if he was a friend or a foe.
Well, what is it that you want?
Sunny contemplated for as long as his flaw allowed him to.
Actually, there is something that you can help me with. I must warn you, though, the favor I'll ask might land you in hot water with your venerable superiors from Clan Valor.
He shrugged.
Additionally, you will only access a memory of my choosing. You'll have to wait a bit, too. It can only be done on a full moon.
Cassia suddenly tensed.
A full moon? Surely you don't mean...
Sunny chuckled.
That's right. I want to sneak into Bastion.
He finished his tea and added nonchalantly,
The real Bastion, of course. Not this mirage we all live in.
It did not take long to discuss the details of their agreement with Cassia. She was wary of him, somewhat, but Sunny held the overwhelming advantage in the negotiations. After all, he had what she wanted, and knew more than her, on top of that. It wasn't hard for him to get the blind seer to agree to his conditions. She could not stay for long either. At least, not without risking her absence being noticed by someone from Clan Valor. Cassia did not want to attract their attention to Sunny, yet. or maybe ever. That suited him fine as well.
What a strange birthday I'm having this year.
When Cassia left, Sunny was once again left alone in the Brilliant Emporium. The city had grown dark, and a peaceful silence settled over the lake. He could see the magnificent castle shine with enchanted lights in the distance, the lanterns reflecting in the calm water like stars. Of course, that castle was just an illusion. Or rather, not just an illusion, but a very special one. The kind of illusion that was, for all intents and purposes, real. More real than reality itself, even. Most of the people who lived inside the castle did not know the difference, since it did not affect their lives. But Sunny knew. There was a different kind of place hidden behind the beautiful towering edifice of Bastion. A much more somber and terrifying place than what everyone was familiar with. That was where he wanted to get to with Cassia's help. There were 6 strongholds depicted on the map Nether had left in the Ebony Tower, each connected to one of the daemons. After visiting the tower once more and reading more of the forbidden runes surrounding the map, Sunny was keenly interested in exploring each of these strongholds. One could even say that the shape of his life depended on it. The Ivory Tower had once belonged to Hope. The tomb of Ariel was the burial site of Oblivion. Sunny had already visited these 2 places, but the other 4... Sunny could not find what he was looking for in the pretty mirage, though. He could only find it in the harrowing reality hidden behind it. That place could only be entered during a full moon, at least by those who did not rule the illusory citadel. That was why he agreed to meet Cassia again then. There was plenty of time left before the next full moon, though, which would give both of them plenty of time to digest the situation. Cassia had a lot to think about, no doubt, and Sunny did too. Throwing one last glance in the window, he yawned and went about closing the Brilliant Emporium. When everything was done, Sunny walked into his bedroom and fell on his bed. Despite the modest size of his room, the bed itself was large and opulent. It was carved from pale, polished wood, with elegant engravings decorating the columns that supported the silk canopy. It was much too comfortable for a simple piece of furniture and looked like something that belonged in a palace instead of a cozy cottage. And it did. This was the very same bed Sunny had slept on in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City a lifetime ago. He had brought it back with the help of the marvelous mimic after being gone from civilization for 3 years, among other things. Sunny put his head on a pillow and closed his eyes. Soon enough, he fell peacefully asleep. The last thought that crossed his mind was rather bitter.
Damnation. She forgot to order a memory.
It was such a shame. He had hoped to get a bunch of soul shards out of Cassia. The full moon came faster than Sunny had expected. His life in Bastion had been peaceful in the meantime. The Brilliant Emporium Cafe enjoyed a steady stream of guests, while the Memory Boutique continued to stagnate with no customers. Sunny attended to the kitchen and minded his business. He was supposed to make a trip to the waking world to stock up on ingredients, but postponed it for now, partially out of laziness and partially because there was a lot on his plate. His life in Godgrave, meanwhile, had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. Nephis was there, and so he had no time for boredom. For new novels. But that was the 3rd Avatar's problem. On the day of the full moon, Sunny let Eiko go home a bit earlier and closed the Brilliant Emporium. Then he walked through the crowded streets of Bastion and bought a ticket to a theater play. A troupe of awakened actors was performing a rendition of A Song of Light and Darkness. Sadly, Sonny only noticed the name of the play after being seated in the parterre. He covered his face with a palm and winced as if suffering a toothache, but remained in his seat. Soon, excited members of the audience surrounded him from all sides. The lights were dimmed, the curtain was lifted, and the play began. No one noticed that a pale young man sitting in one of the first rows did not seem to have a shadow. At the same time, a different incarnation of Sonny was hiding in the darkness near the shore of the lake. It was already dark, and the pale moon was traveling across the starlit sky. The sight of it, the moon, the velvet sky, the silhouette of the magnificent castle, and the vast lake was beautiful beyond words. In fact, it seemed as if there were two moons, one lost in the distant heavens, the other drowning in the silent water. Making sure that no one was nearby, Sonny rose from the shadows and walked toward the shore. The incarnation in the theater was wearing the nebulous mantle, so he was only dressed in a mundane military bodysuit. The quintessence pearl was already summoned, resting in his mouth. The original Sonny hid at the bottom of the lake without moving. Proceeding further would be problematic, so he was letting the reflection of the moon come to him instead. He was sure that someone like Beth would have been infuriated by such a statement, considering that, scientifically speaking, the position of the moon's reflection was supposed to depend on the perspective of the observer, but not of this moon, in this lake, and on this night. When it was time, Sonny made himself as light as a feather, assumed his human form, pushed off the bottom of the lake and swam up. The timing was calculated to a split second. The echoes patrolling the lake were far away, and no one would be able to notice his swift rise. As the pressure of the water lessened, the darkness surrounding him grew brighter. Soon he was surrounded by ethereal radiance, as if swimming through moonlight. The moon itself was like a perfectly round silver disc hanging above Bastion. Its reflection was like a vast, radiant circle, resting. Breaking the surface a few meters away from it, Sonny swam forward and entered that circle. He was blinded by the light, and then the world changed. Sonny had left the illusory realm behind and entered the ghost of reality, hidden behind its splendor. Suddenly, it was much darker. The reflection of the moon disappeared, replaced by scattered vestiges of bleak light. The water of the lake was much colder, and its surface was restless because of the strong wind. Taking a deep breath, Sonny looked up. Above him was a broken sky. The sky was black with pale stars shining coldly in the distance. They were much paler than the bright constellations of the illusory realm, though, because there was something brighter in the night sky, spanning its vast expanse. The fragments of the shattered moon. The moon was up there, above him, but it was viciously broken into countless pieces. Some of them were vast, like jagged continents, floating in the forlorn darkness. Some were infinitely small, painting the sky like clouds of starlight vapor. The trail of moon shards formed a heavenly river that stretched beyond the horizon, illuminating the hidden world with ghostly light. The sight of it was both terrifying and humbling. Sonny did not know what kind of blow could have been so harrowing as to fracture even the moon, or if the moon had been broken from within, like the shell of a cosmic egg. All he knew was that seeing the broken sky filled him with a deep sense of terror. He rarely felt true fear after becoming a transcendent, but the true face of Bastion was one of the few things that could still make him shudder. Looking away from the celestial river, Sonny gazed at the distant castle. The castle existed both in the illusory world and in the terrifying reality. However, While it stood tall and proud in the former, it was a desolate ruin in the latter. The mighty walls had collapsed. The tall towers were toppled. Bastion was like a mountain of fractured white stones, the shape of a once magnificent citadel, barely recognizable in its ghastly crookedness. Here and there, one could still recognize the lines of partially unscathed buildings and courtyards, but they only seemed like an epitaph on a towering gravestone. Across the lake, where the thriving city had been a moment before, a monumental wall of towering dark trees rose to the broken sky. The illusory bastion had been surrounded by a forest once too, a forest that was one enormous living being, a horrid titan with which the Knights of Valor had waged war for decades. Eventually, it was Anvil, still a saint back then, who had destroyed it. But here in the hidden reality, the forest was untouched, and there were many creatures inhabiting it that were much more terrifying than that titan had been, because the real bastion was a death zone. In fact, there were dreadful beings dwelling in the deep, dark lake as well. There was one thing in common between the real bastion and the beautiful mirage created by the demon of imagination, though. Both in the illusory castle and the real castle, enchanted lanterns were shining softly in the darkness of the night. Knights of Valor were often battling nightmare creatures in the forest too. However, they were doing so without the support of their king. That was because he used the dark forest as a crucible to forge better warriors for his army. The dreadful abominations inhabiting it were the whetstone against which Valor's elites were sharpened. Sunny heard that after Antarctica, Morgan had been sent into the forest and ordered not to return until she redeemed her mistake. She eventually emerged from it 2 years later as a saint. He did not know if this was true and couldn't ask because this information wasn't supposed to be known to any outsider to begin with. His preparations had not been in vain. Sunny followed a predetermined path and managed to reach the mountain without disturbing any of the nightmare creatures or stumbling on any of Anvil's swords. Finally, he ascended the steep slope and cautiously surfaced near the ruins. There were lanterns burning high above on the remnants of the broken wall, and human silhouettes patrolling its length. They were Knights of Valor, the best of the best, each of them at least a master. Another human silhouette was standing on the edge of a toppled tower that lay on the ground, its roof protruding into the lake. This one did not carry a luminous lantern, waiting patiently in the darkness. It was Cassia, illuminated by the pale light of the shattered moon, motionless like a statue. Her delicate figure looked even more arresting. Her beauty had already been breathtaking. Here in the hidden realm of True Bastion, it seemed simply enthralling. And yet, strangely enough, Sunny felt his gaze wandering away from her. Somewhat surprised, he realized that it was her presence. Unlike most saints, it did not demand attention, but instead dampened it. It was really more akin to absence than presence. Perhaps it had been for a long while, but he simply did not notice it. Forcing himself to concentrate on the slender figure, Sunny silently emerged from the water and walked over to Cassia. He made no noise whatsoever, and yet she turned her head slightly to face him.
You've come.
Sunny dismissed the quintessence pearl and smiled in the darkness.
Of course. It's not polite to make a lady wait. And I am nothing if not polite. One could say.
Sunny studied Cassia's face, trying to guess what she was thinking about. Having left her alone for several weeks, he did not feel particularly safe. Who knew what conclusions she had drawn in that time, what plans she had formulated? He was a stranger to her now, which meant that the blind seer would not afford him the same grace she afforded her friends. Facing Cassia as someone she might perceive as a potential enemy was a nerve-wracking experience. Sunny felt like he finally understood why Mordred was so wary of her. But then again, he was someone worthy of being feared himself. He was powerful and lethal enough to be an existential threat to anyone who would dare stand in his way. Sunny did not have to be afraid of anyone or anything. Instead, everyone had to be scared of him. If they knew who he was, of course, but no one did, which only made him more terrifying. Well, no matter. It was not like he wanted to frighten Cassia. Sunny was pretty sure that she would treat him with sincerity. He had what she wanted after all. Still, a relationship of a transactional nature was not the most stable. It was in his best interest to build a better connection with her and maybe even reach a point where they shared mutual trust. Sunny looked at Cassia, who was wearing a white tunic and a sea-weave cloak, her eyes hidden behind a strip of blue cloth. Then he glanced at his own black bodysuit. The two of them did not exactly look like a natural pair. Currently, they were accomplices at best, not allies. So how do I go about building trust? One small step at a time, most likely. He looked at the shattered moon, then at the restless waters of the dark lake. Finally, he said, "The ambience here is lovely. However, the lake is rather dreadful. Wouldn't it be better if we left before something very terrible came out of the water to spoil the mood?" Cassia remained silent for a moment, then smiled faintly.
Didn't you come from under the water yourself, Saint Sunless? Are you very terrible as well?
He coughed. Well, yes, I did. And yes, I guess I am. She tilted her head slightly.
I am surprised that you made it all the way here, actually. How did you traverse the lake without being torn apart or alerting anyone to your presence?
That was an obviously probing question, but Sunny didn't mind. He shrugged and answered in a nonchalant tone. He chuckled and added in a light tone. Just my kind of person. I'm a bit of a treacherous bastard myself, to be honest. She cleared her throat.
I see.
Cassia remained silent for a while after that, jumping off the toppled tower to land softly on the ground below. Sunny followed, suppressing the desire to slap himself across the face. What kind of nonsense am I spouting? Right now, Cassia only knew that he was a saint that was somehow connected to her and Nephis, and had undergone the third nightmare with them, which would suggest that he had been their friend, or at least an ally, if not for the fact that Mordred had also been there in the tomb of Ariel. Meaning that not everyone who had entered that nightmare was an ally. Cassia knew that Sunny had played a big role in her life, but she did not know what kind of role he had played. She had to account for the fact that he very well could have been her enemy. At the very least, she wouldn't be sure that he had been a friend. So, why the hell was he willingly admitting to being a wretched traitor? Sunny closed his eyes for a moment and then said, trying very hard to keep the embarrassment out of his voice, "What I'm trying to say is that everyone has their own interest. It's not in your self-interest to surrender me to Clan Valor, and I am pretty sure that you would not sacrifice yourself for their benefit. Otherwise, I would have been visited by a cohort of knights and a few paladins the very next day after your visit." Cassia inhaled slowly.
I see. That makes sense.
She paused for a moment, then suddenly asked,
What is your interest then?
Sunny smiled and looked at the broken sky. That is the question, isn't it? Sunny contemplated his answer for a few moments, then said neutrally, I guess it's the same as yours. Cassia seemed a little surprised.
The same as mine?
He nodded and glanced at her with hidden worry. They were climbing a slope of stone debris, the surface under their feet treacherous and uneven. Cassia seemed to be doing fine, but her movements were a little stiff. No matter how well she had learned to live with her flaw, she was still blind. Sharing other people's perception or sensing a few seconds into the future could not entirely replace sight. However, Sonny could not think of a way to support her on this treacherous slope. He could offer her his hand, but he doubted that she would accept it. They were not that close now. In the end, he did nothing.
Indeed. You told me that you had always wanted to destroy fate, but that is not entirely true, is it? You wouldn't want to struggle against fate if it carried you to a wonderful outcome. The outcome you saw must be terrible. So, what you really want is to reach a desirable outcome, not destroy fate. The latter is merely a means to an end, while the former is the end. That is your interest.
Sonny shrugged.
It is the same for me. My interest is to reach a desirable outcome.
Cassia hesitated for a moment.
So, what is the outcome you desire?
He grinned.
How can I know? It's too soon to talk about an outcome. I don't even know what will happen, let alone how I might want it to end. I merely have a few ideas. In any case, that question is better aimed at you, Saint Cassia. You are much better informed about the future than I am, so what outcome do you desire?
Now they were on the right track. Mutual trust was the end goal, but it had to be built on the foundation of mutual benefit. To help each other benefit, they needed to know what each of them wanted. What was it that Cassia desired? Even after knowing her for so many years, Sonny was not sure. She had always kept her secrets close, which was why he did not expect to hear her honest response.
I want to save the world.
She was not going to just stride into the heart of Anvil's domain, was she? Cassia stopped for a moment, then continued climbing.
Don't worry about it. I will keep my word.
At the same time, she raised her hands and carefully pulled her blindfold off, tying it around one of her wrists. A few moments later, they were on top of the wall. There were enchanted lanterns installed on wooden posts illuminating the ramparts, and there, just a few meters in front of them, 3 heavily armored masters were standing, staring at Cassia and Sonny with vigilant expressions. He could see dangerous flames igniting in their eyes. One of them placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and asked, his voice a mix of confusion and wariness,
Saint Cassia, who? Damn it.
Sonny did not move. And in the next moment, the 3 Knights of Valor underwent an eerie change. Their eyes suddenly grew unfocused, drifting away from Cassia's delicate figure. The tense expressions on their faces disappeared. They remained motionless for a few moments, then continued on their patrol without ever looking back. One walked right past the blind seer, brushing against her seaweave cloak. Cassia calmly moved in the opposite direction, leaving the patrol behind. A moment later, she said over her shoulder,
Don't worry, they won't remember seeing us.
Sonny hurriedly followed her, quietly impressed, and more than a little bit disturbed.
What an insidious power indeed.
Sonny had contemplated the ways Cassia could get him inside the castle, from using a secret passage through the ruins to using her intricate knowledge of runic sorcery to interfere with the defensive array. There were many potential methods for someone as resourceful as her to choose from. What he had not expected was that she would, indeed, simply stride inside without paying the elite forces of Valor any heed. Cassia simply walked forward at a mild pace, poised and elegant. Her calm steps were unhurried. She did not try to avoid the light of the enchanted lanterns or hide from the patrolling knights, acting like nothing was the matter. And yet, despite Sunny's presence, no one paid her any attention or barred her path. The powerful Ascended guarding the castle shivered slightly when her gaze fell on them, their expressions turning slack for a moment. Then they stepped aside and silently continued on their way, as if both Cassia and Sunny had somehow turned invisible. Not invisible, impossible to focus on or remember. The memory of seeing the strange pair was completely erased from the minds of the elite warriors of valor, replaced by a false recollection of nothing notable happening. It was rather impressive and deeply disturbing. Sunny was walking behind Cassia, so he could not see her eyes. He wasn't sure he wanted to either. Looking at her delicate back, he could not help but remember the suffocating despair and cold dread of LO-49. The sinister powers of the transcendent terror that had consumed the station were eerily similar to what Cassia was now capable of. There were differences, of course, but the resemblance was there as well. I hate mental attacks. From the forgotten shore to the desolate expanse of Antarctica, these were the kinds of powers he was wary of the most. There had been creatures who left him broken and bleeding, barely clinging to life. But it was the insidious beings who influenced the mind that had given him the deepest scars. Luckily, Sunny's resistance to mental attacks was now incomparably high. Still, he wondered what Cassia would be capable of if she went all out and fully unleashed her power. Another scene surfaced in his mind, the scene of the battle in the drowned Temple of Fallen Grace, where they had fought against the defiled Sibyl and her enthralled guardians. Back then, he had seen the Echo of Torment fight against the drowned. Of course, Sunny had not known her true identity yet. There had been a moment where the Echo raised one of the demons above the shallow water and gazed into its eyes. The abomination's body convulsed. An indescribable sound escaped from its mouth, and its lifeless body was tossed aside like a rag doll. In that short moment, had the Echo burned all of the demon's memories away, turning the drowned warrior into a mindless shell of a living being?
No, it is simply the nature of this place. The creatures in the lake are deadly, and so are those in the forest. However, the things that come from reflections are the most dangerous, because they are too strange, and we know too little about them. We call them the others.
She took a few more steps and continued calmly.
We must be wary of the others, but we also must be wary of the king. I can shelter you from the gazes of his servants because their swords are sheathed and slumbering. But if you see a sword that is drawn, hide immediately. You must possess some ability to hide yourself, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to traverse the lake.
Sunny nodded, prompting Cassia to add,
You did well to come unarmed. Do not summon a sword of your own while you are here, even if it wasn't forged by valor. Oh, and take this.
She handed him a smooth pebble without turning around. Sunny took it and noticed a complicated weave of elegant runes carved into its surface. The pebble felt slightly warm to the touch. Cassia explained,
This is a token that will allow you to pass most of the defensive enchantments. A counterfeit one I made myself, so don't lose it.
She took a deep breath and then added, a hint of tension finally finding its way into her voice.
If you do, the two of us will end up being invited to an audience with the king. One that we will remember for the rest of our lives. Our short and painful lives, that is.
Sunny smiled darkly, remembering the sight of Anvil facing that great titan in Antarctica. He knew that the two of them would meet eventually, but it was too soon to meet the King of Swords. For now, is he really here? Before Cassia could answer, a loud sound rolled across the ruins, disturbing the silence of the night. It was deep and melodious, ringing across the dark lake like thunder, the sound of a hammer falling on an anvil. The ringing of steel was still echoing across the desolate ruin when Sunny shifted slightly and looked in the direction where the sound had come from. There was a tall tower rising into the broken sky some distance away. Its walls were covered by a net of deep cracks, but the crumbling tower still stood straight and proud, much higher than any other structure in the vast ruin. Outlined against the pale radiance of the shattered moon, its dark shape was like a battered sword thrust into the ground by the hand of a celestial giant. The tower was dark, but at the very top of it, a fiery glow escaped from the arching windows. It was as if a sea or vermilion flame was burning inside. That was where the ringing sound had come from. A moment later, another strike resounded, and then another. They rolled across the restless lake, forceful and methodical, filling the night with the sound of clashing metal. Suddenly, Sunny felt as if he was on a battlefield, and his heart started to beat faster. He froze for a moment, looking at the dark tower with a somber expression. "What is that?" Cassia turned to face the tower as well. She remained silent for a few moments, then said evenly,
"It's the king. He is forging."
Sunny couldn't help but frown. He had just asked about Anvil's whereabouts, and a moment later, the King of Swords announced his presence. Sunny did not really fear him, but that was not because the Steel Sovereign was not worthy of being feared. It was simply because Sunny had developed an unwise tolerance for fear after a decade of being constantly exposed to all kinds of unimaginable horror. Still, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't apprehensive.
Spooky bastard.
He hesitated for a moment, then asked quietly,
"What is he forging?"
Cassia smiled.
"What else? He is forging a sword. The king must have created 1,000,000 of them already, but he never stops for long. The swords that the Knights of Valor wield are merely some that he discarded. The ones paladins wield are as well."
Then, the storm of swords Anvil had commanded in Antarctica were all forged by him then, probably. Sunny could not really imagine how a human being could have created so many of them. He sighed.
And here I was thinking of myself as an accomplished weaponsmith.
Cassia tilted her head a little.
"Oh, right. You create memories. And the last time we met, we were alone, so I could only borrow your sight, which meant staring at myself for the entire conversation. Well, I won't lie. I did steal a peek through the eyes of one of the knights we met today. I was curious to see what the famous owner of the Brilliant Emporium Cafe looks like."
She shrugged.
"Actually, you do look like a legacy. But maybe it's just because of the confidence that comes with being a saint."
Sunny shook his head with a crooked smile, not letting her off.
"I'm sure that you observed me carefully and for a while before paying a visit to the Brilliant Emporium. And by observed, I mean spied on. Thank you for the compliment in any case."
This time it was Cassia's turn to cough.
"I'm right on the money."
He enjoyed her slight embarrassment for a few moments, then said neutrally,
"I don't know much about how Enchanters of Valor create memories, but it is probably due to the war god's lineage. After all, she is also the goddess of progress, technology, and craft. Plus, family members are known to awaken aspects of a similar nature, perhaps due to sharing a similar upbringing and fate. I assure you, my upbringing was quite different from that of a member of Clan Valor."
Sunny hesitated before adding,
"The way I create memories is different from theirs."
Cassia tilted her head a little and added curiously,
"I've been told that the memories you make are not very potent, but have the benefit of being perfectly suited to their wielder. You must be hiding the true extent of your abilities to avoid attention, though. How good are you exactly?"
Sunny briefly glanced at Cassia's delicate neck, noticing a thin string hanging around it. Would she be able to remember if he said that the charm she wore had been made supreme by him? Probably not. He smiled. I doubt that any person in the world can create a better memory than me. It wasn't an empty boast. Forge Masters of Valor could create potent memories, but their craft was the result of unique aspect abilities and runic sorcery, which was alien to the concept of memories. Sunny, meanwhile, was a true weaver, the only master of weaver's sorcery in existence. Therefore, his abilities were broader and infinitely more flexible, so really, there was just one entity better than him at creating memories, the Nightmare spell, but he wasn't going to compete with that. He glanced at Cassia and asked, "Why? Are you going to order a memory after all? Let me tell you, St. Cassia, I'll give you an excellent discount. Our service is top-notch, and we can handle all kinds of orders. Combat memories, utility memories, even cosmetic memories are not out of the question. Also, I don't usually do this, but just for you, I'll disclose a big secret. We can even make a custom name and description for your memory. There's no better memento or one-of-a-kind gift for a loved one." Cassia touched her hair nervously, then added in a dubious tone,
Really? Well, I might indeed commission a custom memory from you then.
Cassia guided Sunny deeper into the ruins. She showed more caution after descending from the outer wall, to his relief. The young woman remained calm and composed, but he noticed that she chose roundabout paths, keeping to the less populated areas of the ancient castle. From time to time, ghostly runes ignited on the weathered stones as they passed. The pebble Sunny held in his hands grew a little warmer in those moments. After a while, Cassia spoke again.
We are staying in the desolate parts of True Bastion to avoid running into someone powerful. I can handle the knights without too much problem, but if we meet a saint, especially one from the direct bloodline, a complication might arise.
Sunny nodded, strangely relieved. It was nice to have confirmation that Cassia's power was not limitless, even if she was on his side. The blind seer lingered for a few moments, then asked,
You only told me that you needed to get inside the castle. Where exactly do you want me to lead you?
He shrugged. As close to the main keep as possible. I'll know where I need to go once I get there. In fact, Sunny did not know the precise location of what he was looking for. He just knew that there was something hidden there, in Bastion, and that the members of Clan Valor must not have found it yet. Well, maybe they had, but he was willing to bet they hadn't. That was because the timeline did not make sense. The citadel that the founder of Valor had conquered was the illusory Bastion, not the real one. Otherwise, it would not have been conquered at all. No member of the first generation had been powerful enough to survive in a death zone after all, let alone claim it. It was only after Broken Sword, Anvil, Keysong, and Asterion had become transcendent that this hidden place was disturbed by humans. Even then, Sunny doubted that Valor had truly occupied the true Bastion before the Sovereigns emerged, which meant that they had not had a lot of time to explore the vast ruin, especially considering how dangerous it was and how few people had access to it. The best warriors of Valor had also spent more than a decade conquering distant regions of the Dream Realm to expand the king's domain. Perhaps Anvil and his knights had discovered a few of the more easily accessible secrets of the fallen castle, but Sunny doubted that they would have found them all, or at least he hoped so. His hope was based on the fact that there was only one person in the world who possessed a daemon's lineage, and that person was him. So, Sunny cautiously extended his senses outward, communicating with the ancient shadows populating the ruin. He could feel the dark hollows hiding under the rubble. Some of them were simply the result of stone blocks falling on each other. Some were halls and chambers that had been buried and forgotten in the devastation. However, none of them were what he was looking for. Sonny smiled. Found it. There was absolutely nothing below them. But that was exactly what gave away the hidden sanctum. Even if the mountain was made from solid stone, there would be cracks and crevices inside it, and those would be populated by ancient shadows. With how potent Sonny's shadow sense was, he would have felt their presence, but he felt nothing, which meant that something was blocking his senses, deep, deep below. Sonny opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Noticing that he had stopped, Cassia halted and turned to face him. Her eyes were blue and clear, devoid of any abnormality. He still chose to look away.
What is the matter?
Sonny smiled subtly and shrugged. I found what I was looking for. She tilted her head a little.
What now, then?
He hesitated for a bit, then sighed. Now, please excuse me for a moment, Saint Cassia. Taking a step forward, he placed his hands on her delicate shoulders, and then he pulled her into the shadows, teleporting both of them into the depth of the mountain. A moment later, the two of them were far below ground, with countless tons of stone hanging above their heads. If Sonny was not mistaken, the hidden sanctum he had found was most of the way to the bottom of the lake, at the very heart of the mountains. In the past, Sonny had not been able to carry living beings with him when he stepped through shadows, with the sole exception of Nephis. It was different now that he was a saint, though. He could pull much heavier inanimate objects with him, as well as actual people. The latter were very cumbersome, though, consuming a lot of his essence, especially those whose souls were vast and powerful. Teleporting Cassia with him, and to such a remote place, had drained a good portion of his reserves. Sonny sighed inwardly and tried to take a deep breath. There was nothing to inhale, though. A strangely calm voice resounded in his head, startling him.
There is no air here.
It was Cassia's voice. But why was she so calm? Sonny glanced at the blind seer with a hint of confusion, then shrugged and summoned the quintessence pearl. A few seconds later, a beautiful white pearl appeared in his hand. This time, Sonny did not place it in his mouth, keeping it between himself and Cassia. Soon, the two of them were able to breathe again. Please stay close, Saint Cassia. Saints could keep their breath for much longer than mundane people, so neither of them had felt any discomfort in these few moments. Still, he had expected that Cassia would at least be a little startled. But then again, why would she be? Cassia did not receive visions of the future anymore, but her awakened ability was functioning perfectly fine. She must have known that Sonny would use Shadow Step a few seconds before he had, and saw him summoning the Quintessence Pearl before he ever did. Cassia usually acted in a way that made people forget about this ability of hers, but if one stopped to think about it, she had every conversation and witnessed every event twice. For as long as her awakened ability was active, it was all but impossible to surprise her, and she would have definitely kept it active while sneaking a suspicious saint into a sovereign's stronghold. Her ascended ability, meanwhile, seemed to have undergone a change. Unless she was using a memory to communicate with him telepathically, it was that ability of hers that allowed her to talk to people she had marked. Sonny was well acquainted with this manner of conversation thanks to the Shroud of Dusk, so he wasn't worried about thinking an unwanted thought aloud. Convenient. No wonder Nephis had seemed so well informed about his shadows when they met in the Nameless Temple. Cassia, meanwhile, looked like she was having similar thoughts. Facing Sonny, she tilted her head a little and asked,
A spatial movement ability?
She turned her head sharply, but Sonny simply continued in a carefree tone. So, what I am trying to find here is lost knowledge, and, if I am lucky, something just as forbidden. With that, Sonny grabbed the handle, turned it, and pushed the door open. Or at least, he tried to. The door didn't budge. Scowling slightly, Sonny put more strength into it. He had a lot of strength as a transcended terror, and yet the door didn't move.
It's locked, but there is no lock. Have the hinges rusted through? No. Wait.
You should try pulling.
Sonny coughed awkwardly, then pulled instead of pushing. The door opened easily, and the hinges produced no noise.
I was just going to. Yeah.
Cassia did not say anything and walked over, stopping just beside him. Sonny tensed slightly.
Why is she standing so close? Oh, right. I told her to. Because of the quintessence pearl.
So, what kind of knowledge do you hope to find?
He walked out of the stone chamber and stopped, studying the long corridor beyond.
Oh, you know, nothing too unexpected. Why did the Doom War start? How did it end? Who won? How did the gods die? How did the daemons die? Where are their corpses?
Sonny took a deep breath and added nonchalantly,
Why was the nightmare spell created? What is its purpose? What happened to its creator? Simple stuff like that.
Of course, there was another goal Sonny was pursuing, and another thing he wanted to find. The remaining parts of Weaver's forbidden lineage he wanted. He wasn't satisfied with only having an incomplete collection of fragments. Not anymore, at least.
Now, this is going to be a problem.
Standing on the threshold, Sonny studied the long corridor. It stretched in both directions as far as he could see, bending slightly. The stone floor was smooth and even, while the tall ceiling was illuminated by a scattering of softly glowing gemstones. The turquoise gems were embedded into it, dimly drowning the corridor in pale light. The problem was with the walls. Both of them were perfectly smooth and seamless, as if the corridor had been formed inside the mountain by some unknown means instead of being constructed. Much worse, their glossy surface was reflective. The walls of the corridor were like two endless mirrors. Remembering what Cassia had said, Sonny frowned. The blind seer inhaled deeply behind him.
Oh, my.
Her voice was somber. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then asked neutrally,
Left or right?
Cassia answered with a hint of confusion.
Why are you asking me?
He scratched the back of his head and shrugged.
Why not? My luck is pretty much non-existent, so I'll trust your intuition.
She tilted her head a little.
Really? Because my intuition tells me to get out of here as soon as possible.
Yeah, I should have expected that answer.
Sonny closed his eyes for a second, then cleared his throat.
On second thought, why don't we just go left?
The moment the two of them stepped into the corridor, the reflections appeared on the polished walls. Since the two endless mirrors were positioned directly opposite each other, the reflections stretched into infinity, forming countless mirrored corridors. When Sonny took a step, a legion of his reflections took a step. When Cassia followed, a legion of her reflections followed too. They were surrounded by a myriad of identical copies of themselves, marching in step with them on both sides. Suddenly, he felt very uneasy.
You said not to answer if a reflection speaks to me, right?
The only sound that broke the silence was the soft rustle of Cassia's clothes. Sonny's steps, meanwhile, were completely noiseless. But then, another sound broke the silence, making him stop in his tracks. It was the quiet but unmistakable sound of a glass surface cracking. Sonny froze for a moment.
To hell with this.
Turning around, he grabbed Cassia and immediately used Shadow Step to teleport back in the direction they had come. Without Shadow Sense, he could only jump as far as he could see. After a swift series of consecutive jumps, Sonny returned them to the small stone chamber and shut the door, then slumped tiredly on the floor.
Damn. I hate mirrors so much.
Come to think of it, there had to be some connection between the reason he tended to avoid mirrors and this place. Mordred must have visited Bastion before being handed to Asterion. Had he perhaps encountered something strange here? Or maybe his mother? Cassia quietly straightened her clothes and sat down as well. Neither of them were physically tired, but being on edge for extended periods of time inevitably led to mental fatigue. She was silent for a while, then asked,
So, what now, Sonny? Are we turning back?
He glanced at her darkly and remained motionless for a moment. Then he shook his head.
No.
With that, Sonny raised his free hand and summoned another memory. A few moments later, a small lantern carved out of black stone appeared on his palm. Cassia turned her head and concentrated on it, a slight frown appearing on her face.
A lantern?
He nodded.
Indeed. However, it is a very special one. This lantern does not produce light. Instead, it swallows it.
What was a reflection? It was light that had been cast back. Therefore, much like shadows, reflections could not exist without light. Gritting his teeth, Sonny stood up and opened the door of the stone chamber again. At the same time, he opened the gate of the shadow lantern. A moment later, a torrent of shadows surged into the mirror corridor, flooding it with impenetrable darkness. A torrent of shadows flowed into the corridor, submerging it in total darkness. The light of the glowing gemstones was swallowed and disappeared without a trace, turning them bleak and lifeless. Sonny had summoned a swarm of vast and ancient shadows to do the job. These old shadows were unfathomable. It would have taken an equally potent source of light to dispel them. The gemstones had been created from the mind of the demon of imagination. True, perhaps they would have chased away the darkness if the shadows were alone, but they were in the presence of their lord, and that alone made them much more tyrannical. A few moments later, a long stretch of the corridor had turned completely lightless. The infinity mirror of its walls was now dull and empty. Nothing reflected on their dim surface, and no reflection haunted the hidden sanctum. Sonny let out a sigh.
Who knew that I would use this trick today?
What he had done was not pure improvisation. Instead, it was one of the methods he had contemplated when thinking about how to deal with Mordred. Cassia seemed impressed.
These shadows obey you?
Sonny shrugged.
If I treat them nicely.
Wild shadows were like that. Most were devoted to Sonny, but some were obstinate and willful. The former would obey him out of affection or reverence, but the latter needed to be coaxed and enticed.
Let's go.
The two of them returned to the corridor. It seemed much smaller without the countless reflections stretching endlessly into the ghostly distance. Claustrophobic, even. Still, Sonny felt much more at ease now than he had before. Cassia suddenly spoke, drawing his attention.
Are we going left again?
Sonny smiled.
That's a good question. No, let's try right this time.
They turned right and started walking at a measured pace. The shadows moved with them, keeping the corridor dark both ahead and behind. Just like that, Sonny and Cassia advanced forward for a while. Then they encountered an intersection. A similar corridor crossed the one they had been traversing, and so Sonny had another choice to make. He frowned slightly and decided to turn right again. The second corridor had a slight bend to it as well, so it was impossible to see far ahead. Sometime later, there was another intersection, and then another, and another. Cassia frowned, remained silent for a few moments, then nodded.
Fine. I will guide you inside the castle once again next month, in exchange for another memory.
Sonny dismissed the endless spring and suppressed a chuckle.
Why did she put on a show if we both knew that she would agree? It's a date then.
He froze for a moment, then added hurriedly,
No, wait, it's not a date. I misspoke. It's an arrangement. You know what I mean.
Cassia observed him with a hint of amusement, then shrugged.
As you wish. Now, I think it's time for me to receive my payment.
Sunny sighed. He had not been looking forward to this part.
Fine. We have a bit of time left, so let's do it here.
As long as he returned to the lake before sunrise, there was no safer place in Bastion than this labyrinth. Here, they were hidden from the king's gaze, and no one would disturb them.
I still hate it.
Sunny led Cassia to the stone chamber, called the shadows back into the lantern, and closed the door. Then he sat on the floor, cross-legged. Cassia sat down in front of him and calmly looked him in the eyes, her back perfectly straight.
One memory of your choosing.
Sunny nodded slowly. She took a deep breath.
Then think about what you want me to see.
He did. The bitter cold, the dim twilight, the cracking of ice as he broke through it and climbed onto the desolate shore, the dark storm of seething emotions raging in his hollow heart. Cassia's beautiful blue eyes suddenly glistened, pulling him deeper into their depths, changing. And in the next moment, Sunny gasped. A cold ocean washed the shore of a desolate land, its waves frozen and unmoving. The empty sky seemed dim and uncaring, the sun hidden behind a somber veil. The land itself was silent and forlorn, its lifeless expanse buried in snow. Not far from the shore, the layer of ice shackling the ocean suddenly fractured and exploded, revealing the restless surface of the dark water. A pale hand rose above the edge and dug into the ice with crushing force. A moment later, a gaunt young man climbed from the cold water, stepping on the frozen waves with a chilling expression on his sunken alabaster face. His appearance was both tantalizing and frightening. The young man only wore the tattered remains of a military bodysuit, which was mostly gone. His fair skin was as white as snow, marred by countless gruesome but eerily bloodless wounds. His eyes, on the contrary, were as dark as the depths of a lightless abyss. The black silk of his wet hair moved slightly in the frigid wind. He looked like the wretched corpse of a drowned deity that had crawled out of a frozen hell. His slender torso was mostly bare, revealing an intricate tattoo of a coiling serpent that covered most of his arms, chest, and back. The dark serpent was so lifelike that it almost seemed like its onyx scales were moving under the young man's skin. Sunny remained motionless for a while, looking at the desolate landscape in front of him. Then he took a step forward. Finally, after so much time had passed, he was back at the Antarctic Center. He had returned to Falcon Scott. When he took the second step, his gruesomely torn skin was already healing. When he took the third, intricate plates of battered onyx armor covered his mangled body, shielding it from the cold and wind.
It looks the same.
After the third nightmare, when all was said and done, Sunny had returned to the Northern Quadrant among the refugees. He spent some time there, taking care of unfinished business. Not that there was a lot for him to do after being erased from the world. Meeting Rain was the very last thing he did. Then, untethered from everything and everyone, he set his sights back on Antarctica. Sunny stared at the cliffs for some time, then turned his gaze away. He wasn't quite ready to enter the city yet. He spent several hours roaming the shore aimlessly, as if looking for something. The frigid cold was absolutely lethal, but Sunny paid it no attention. His shadow sense spread far and wide, enveloping a vast area of the desolate land.
Where is it? Where is it?
In the end, he stopped and stared at the ground silently. Finally, there was a hint of emotion on his face. Sonny raised a trembling hand and covered his eyes, a brittle smile twisting his lips. He couldn't find it. The grave where he had buried his soldiers. He had not been quite in his right mind back then, and the terrain had been changed a lot by the snow and ice. So, he simply did not know where the resting place of Belle, Dorn, and Samara was anymore.
Damn it.
A stifled sound escaped from Sonny's mouth, and then Sonny angrily struck the rusted remains of a broken MWP that lay nearby, covered with snow. There was a thunderous boom, and the massive machine exploded. Jagged pieces of alloy shot into the distance like deadly shrapnel, while its torso was sent flying. It collided against the cliffs 100 or so meters away, causing an entire section of the cliffside to fracture and collapse in an avalanche of scattered rocks. Unfazed, Sonny raised his head to the sky and let out a disoriented scream. Then looked down, his eyes boiling with dark fury.
Kill it. I will rip that thing apart.
Gritting his teeth, he breathed in the cold air of Antarctica and headed for the ruins of the city. Sonny did not know what he expected to see in Falcon Scott. He didn't even know why he felt compelled to enter it, and yet he did enter it, walking along the silent streets with a distant expression on his pale face. He came here precisely because he didn't want to, reluctant to see the monument to his failure. He owed it to himself, and to those people whom he had failed to protect, to witness their final resting place in all its horrid glory. Perhaps it was simply because now that no one remembered him, Sonny wanted to at least remember himself, even the things he would have wanted to forget. The city was pretty much exactly like he had imagined. It was a frozen graveyard. The fatal cold of the winter beast's blizzard had killed everyone in what seemed like mere moments. The corpses were hidden inside the buildings or buried under snow, so the city seemed utterly empty. They had not suffered, at least. Some buildings had collapsed in the past months under the weight of the ice. Others stood like colossal gravestones or frigid mausoleums, maybe, for those who had perished inside. Strangely enough, no nightmare creatures seemed to have entered the city to feast on the corpses. It was as though the winter beast had marked this place as its territory. Sonny passed a few familiar structures: the barracks where the irregulars had been stationed, the government compound, the dormitory tower where Beth and Professor Obel had lived. His mind was flooded with memories, which only made his mental state deteriorate further. It was a strange thing to be alone. Now that Sonny was alone, erased from existence, he felt no compulsion to control his emotions or maintain the illusion of normalcy. There was no one to witness him fall apart anyway, and nobody to get the wrong impression of him. There were no tethers connecting him to the world. Yes, but as it turned out, those same tethers had been like supports that held his mind together. He must have looked quite disturbing from the side. Only now that Sonny was truly and utterly alone did he realize how much of his habits and behaviors had been dictated by the need to blend in with his environment, with human society. Now, he didn't have to bother with maintaining acceptable expressions, keeping improper feelings from his gaze, and saying the right words. Or saying anything at all, really.
Maybe I should do all these things anyway.
He suspected that giving in to this utter freedom would make him slip into some sort of derangement eventually, but couldn't bother to care. Finally, he reached the crumbled remains of the city wall and spent some time gazing at the snowy field beyond. Climbing over the wreckage, Sonny jumped down, turned his body light enough to walk on the snow, and left the ghost of Falcon Scott behind. This was probably the last time he would ever see it. but that was fine. Turning his head, Sonny studied the ugly creature and then took a step toward it.
Where are you going? Who allowed you to leave?
Approaching the abomination, he crouched beside it and stared into its frenzied eyes with a smile. The creature's terrifying maw was less than a meter away from his face, but Sonny didn't care.
You chose the wrong day to exist, wretch. But it's for the best. It's exactly what I need.
He outstretched one hand, sensing the soul serpent slither forth. Soon, a torrent of darkness flowed from his fingers onto the snow, forming into a massive shadow. That shadow was not a great serpent, however. Instead, it took the form of a towering creature that had two stumpy legs, an emaciated hunched torso, and disproportionately long multi-jointed hands. Two of them. Each ending with a set of horrifying bone claws, and another two, these ones shorter, ending with almost human-like fingers. Its body was covered in ragged, inky black fur, and there were 5 glossy black eyes on its head. Beneath them, a terrible maw crowding with razor-sharp teeth was half open, as though in anticipation. A vicious drool was running down the creature's chin and dripping into the snow. The most unnerving part, though, were the strange shapes endlessly moving, worm-like, under the creature's skin. It was the Mountain King. Or rather, a version of the Mountain King that looked as if it had been dipped into a pool of liquid darkness. Sonny's cold smile widened a little, his dark eyes gleaming with sinister will.
Go on. This one will be the first.
Serpent took a heavy step forward and grabbed the struggling abomination with its powerful hand. Then, one of the worm-like larvae, moving under his skin, crawled from under his claws and burrowed into the monster's flesh. The nightmare creature froze for a moment and then let out a chilling wail. A moment later, its body contorted in a terrible convulsion. Sonny grinned darkly.
But not the last. No, not at all.
The Formless ability allowed Serpent to assume the form of any shadow resting in Sonny's soul, inheriting its powers and abilities. The shadow had to be of the same or lower rank and class, which meant that the most powerful form Serpent could currently assume was that of the Sibyl of the Fallen Grace, the Terror of LO-49. And in fact, that form was suited for Sonny's goal much better than the Mountain King. However, the Serpent had to maintain the transformation with its own essence and could not sustain such a powerful shape for a long time, let alone constantly. Once the shadow's essence was exhausted, the effects of those powers it had assumed would be gone. In other words, if Sonny had ordered Serpent to turn into the harrowing Sibyl and enthrall a swarm of nightmare creatures, those abominations would have been released from the mind hex before too long. The Mountain King, meanwhile, was merely an awakened tyrant. As a transcendent terror, Serpent could maintain that form almost indefinitely, especially after Sonny augmented it with the shadows. That was exactly what he needed in order to collect a small army of abominable thralls. It was funny. The larvae the Mountain King spawned were dormant beasts. Therefore, his first thrall was also a dormant beast, but one wearing a fallen monster's corpse. What exactly did it make him? Sonny did not know, nor did he care that much. Sonny glanced at the towering figure of the Soul Serpent, then at the hideous creature laying obediently on the snow. He sighed. By now, Serpent had to possess at least 2 new abilities since it had risen in class twice, while following Rain, and in rank once. But without the spell conveniently informing Sonny about what these abilities did, He had no way of knowing what they were. There had not been a lot of time for research and experimentation either. While he was traversing the toxic wilderness of the Northern Quadrant and fighting his way through the depths of the ocean, all he had was a suspicion that one of these abilities had to do with Serpent's weapon form, while the other one had to do with souls and spirit essence. However, he wasn't sure. Well, I'll find out later, he thought. Once the winter beast was dead, there would be no serious threats left in the Antarctic Center for a while, at least until the powerful abominations in East Antarctica sensed its absence and crossed the half-frozen strait. He even started to enjoy the slaughter after a while. Not all of them died, of course. From time to time, he chose a nightmare creature to be infected with a Mountain King's larva. Slowly but surely, his swarm of thralls grew, which made it harder to hide them. Eventually, he had to abandon stealth and advance forward openly. Sunny hoped that a horde of nightmare creatures would attack him, but sadly the number of abominations seemed to have dwindled under the winter beast's reign. The great hordes of nightmare creatures were nowhere to be seen. Some must have migrated south, some had succumbed to cold, and some could have even crossed the strait to East Antarctica. Only the strongest and most resilient abominations remained, and these were the abominations Sunny hunted. There were creatures of all kinds following him now. He did not choose the most powerful monstrosities or the most lethal to enthrall, so their combat power was not that impressive. What he pursued was a variety of types, shapes, forms, elemental affinities, and resistances. These thralls were not meant to kill the winter beast after all. They were only meant to help Sunny find a way to kill the creature himself. The further inland he went, the colder it became. There were lesser nightmare creatures around too, since fewer and fewer of them could withstand the dreadful cold. Even Sunny was starting to feel uncomfortable, hiding from the cutting wind and wearing Ananka's mantle to warm himself. By the time he reached the ruins of Erebus Field, the cold was almost lethal. Here in the vicinity of Mount Erebus, though, Sunny could at least breathe easily. The siege capital that had once stood at the foot of the volcano was destroyed by Goliath. The ruins were mostly drowned in lava. The lava had long turned to stone, of course, which was now buried by snow. Still, the heat coming from below the ground made this area a little bit warmer. Standing on a cliff above the snowy plain, Sunny took a deep breath and studied it carefully. It will do. There was no better battlefield in the Antarctic Center if he wanted to kill the winter beast. 2 weeks after Sunny had returned to Antarctica, he stood on a cliff overseeing a vast scene of devastation. In front of him, a great valley was formed from collapsed mountains and stone debris, the ruinous landscape now covered in ice and snow. This was the place where Skytide, Wake of Ruin, and Direfang had battled the 3 emerged titans, Whispering Legion, Goliath, and Winter Beast. The Whispering Legion had been slain, while the other 2 calamitous abominations drove the saints away. An entire span of the mountain range had been demolished in the process. There were nightmare gates hidden under the crushed stone, without a doubt, or maybe above it. Sunny could not see because most of the valley was hidden by a raging blizzard. This blizzard was the very same that had once enveloped Falcon Scott, sapping the lives of all its remaining inhabitants. It was the manifestation of the winter beast's authority. The air was so cold that each breath Sunny took felt like he was swallowing a scattering of sharp knives. Not paying it any attention, he was gazing down with an expressionless face, his eyes drowning in deep darkness. His gaunt body was encased in fearsome onyx armor, and that armor was shrouded in darkness. Out there in the valley, far below, a long line of nightmare creatures was advancing into the blizzard. Their movements were still and unnatural, as if they were corpses animated by some unknown force. But at the same time, None of them showed any fear or hesitation. Neither did they show the demented frenzy inherent to most abominations. They just slowly marched into the snow, stretching into a wide line that seemed to encompass the front of the blizzard. A few moments later, the first of the nightmare creatures collapsed, its corpse swiftly becoming encased in ice. Standing on the tall cliff, Sonny pursed his lips in disdain. Weak. Not that he needed these useless things to be strong. No, their purpose was different. It was to show him which type of nightmare creature was the most resistant to the winter beast's cold. Killing the wretched Titan in such a fashion was bound to be much more satisfying. Down in the crumbled valley, the blizzard suddenly expanded, as if coming to life. A terrible wind blew, crushing into Sonny with a chilling force. The wall of swirling snow and ice particles slowly advanced, moving in his direction. A dark smile split his face in half. Look at that, serpent. We seem to have been spotted. He had hoped that hiding in the shadows on top of a distant mountain would be enough to throw the Titan off his scent, but he had been wrong. Perhaps the creature had been aware of his presence all along, but did not bother to react until he dared to challenge it directly. In any case, the corrupted Titan, Winter Beast, was finally rising to deal with the transcendent terror, Sunless. Sonny let out a sigh, then moved his shoulders to stretch his stiff muscles. I guess I'll have to finish the preparations faster. With that, he glanced at the towering figure of the Mountain King that stood in the darkness behind him. Under his gaze, the tyrant suddenly turned into a torrent of black liquid, which then reformed itself into a different, equally ghastly abomination. A spire messenger now stood on the edge of the cliff, its terrifying black beak cutting the wind like a dark blade. The creature's pale body was utterly black, and its many powerful limbs pierced the ice with long, sharp talons. Throwing one last look at the approaching snowstorm, Sonny jumped onto its back. In the next moment, the mighty wings of the creature raised a hurricane, and it shot into the air, carrying him back in the direction of Erebus Field. The snowstorm followed. The monstrous spire messenger tore apart the gelid wind as it raced across the frigid vastness of the twilight sky. Behind it, a churning wall of dancing snow crawled slowly, devouring the world like a hungry beast. There was a gaunt figure kneeling on the back of the flying monster, clutching at its black feathers with an onyx gauntlet. Sonny did not look back, knowing that Serpent was much faster than the pursuing Titan. In that, at least, they held an advantage. It will catch up soon enough, though. He was contemplating the results of sacrificing his swarm of thralls. None of them had been able to withstand the lethal cold of the Winter Beast's domain for long, which meant that there was no type of resistance that could help Sonny survive there. At least none he could find in a short amount of time. The thralls had perished swiftly, sapped of warmth and life. Their bodies fell into the snow, slowly turning into ice sculptures. The conclusion, then, was that Sonny had to use something other than a living being to reach the heart of the snowstorm. That would suggest that an undead creature would fare better, but that was not true. There had been a few ghouls among the thralls, and they died just the same. But there is a much simpler solution. He didn't have to enter the heart of the sinister blizzard himself, or send one of his shadows. He could simply use an inanimate object, a projectile. Indeed, the simplest solution was most often the correct one. The best way to kill the Winter Beast was to simply bring down a deluge of ranged attacks on its head, or whatever it was that it had instead of a head. Sunny had not been able to do something like that in the past because there was no telling where the Titan's actual manifestation hid within the vast snowstorm. Now, however, his shadow sense could extend across many kilometers. Even if he failed to find the winter beast's precise location, he could at least pinpoint the general area.
That is, if that thing even has a physical body. For all I know, it could be a sentient storm.
That was one of the risks he had to face. The other problem was actually delivering a ranged attack across such a vast distance. Not only was it physically difficult, but the fatal cold and the hurricane wind raging within the snowstorm would become an obstacle. The closer one got to its heart, the worse they became. A split second later, though, the world shook. Cracks formed on the vast field of snow, and far behind him, the mouth of Mount Erebus suddenly exploded with a gargantuan pillar of ash. A terrifying gust of hot wind rolled across the desolate landscape, pushing back the cold for a moment. Then the volcano shone with an angry red glow, and a fountain of incandescent lava shot skyward with a deafening roar. Mount Erebus was erupting. Of course, it did not just happen to erupt precisely when Sunny needed it. Instead, he had sent Fiend into its depths to find a ripe magma chamber and cause an eruption when the time was right. With Goliath having already destabilized the entire region, doing so was not too hard. And with Fiend's robust steel carapace and fire affinity, he could survive inside a volcanic explosion without much trouble. Granted, the little hoodlum would not be happy with its master once he returned. If both of them survived what was coming next, of course. As the wall of swirling snow approached Sunny from the front, devouring the world, a rolling cloud of ash spread from Mount Erebus behind him. The stench of sulfur permeated the frigid air, cold wind crashing into a wave of heat in an invisible collision. Sunny's hair danced as a vast darkness swallowed the sky, plunging the icy plain in its shadow. As everything around him became enveloped in shadows, a sinister smile appeared on Sunny's pale face. He stretched, and then slowly rose to his feet. The cold darkness dwelling in his eyes finally exploded, turning into vicious glee. Looking at the approaching storm, Sunny raised his fist and said, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage,
"Hey, Winter Beast! Do you remember me?"
Then his voice grew calmer and colder, full of murderous wrath.
"Probably not, but I remember you."
As ash rained from the sky and the ground quaked, Sunny inhaled deeply and extended his shadow sense as far as he could. Soon, his mind was flooded with an avalanche of sensory data, almost making him dizzy. He was still unaccustomed to how vast his sight was now. Of course, he didn't actually see anything, but after years of perceiving the shapes and movements of the shadows, it was not much different. Sunny had tested his limits while relying on his shadow sense to stay alive in the ocean, but the dark depths were different from land. They were unfathomable and empty, with nothing but the cold currents to see. Here in the Antarctic center, though, there was almost too much to see. Further, and further still, Sunny filtered out the useless data to keep his transcendent mind from overloading and reached across many kilometers of cracking ice toward the approaching snowstorm. Soon, he sensed the shadows trembling from the lethal cold. Even they were not spared the cruel tyranny of the winter beast.
"Somewhere between 40 and 50 kilometers. This is as far as I can reach."
His shadow sense reached further than his actual sight, which was limited due to the curvature of the earth, and yet it wasn't enough to find the heart of the vast blizzard. At least, not until it got closer and enveloped him.
Still, it is already close enough for the initial greeting.
Sunny extended a hand. A thin pillar of darkness rose from the ground, growing to stand at almost twice his height. Then it solidified, turning into an inky black javelin with a needle-sharp tip. He grasped and weighed it, looking at the towering wall of swirling snow with a cold expression. He had created the javelin in the image of the siege souvenir, a similar weapon he had once fashioned to slay Goliath. The original souvenir had been made from the quill of a corrupted abomination, while this one was merely a manifested shadow. However, that shadow had been suffused with his transcendent essence and was thus equal to a transcendent weapon. A uniquely powerful one at that, due to the fact that his soul had been altered by Soul Weave. Sadly, the Shadow Javelin lacked the powerful enchantments that the real siege souvenir had possessed. Still, it was not bad for an opening salvo. Exhaling slowly, Sunny took a step forward. Using the full augmentation of his 5 shadows, he infused a torrent of essence into his muscles and tendons, pushed against the ground with his feet, and strained his entire body to whip his hand forward and send the javelin into the dark sky. The moment he threw it, the world quaked again. Sunny smiled.
Let's make this a bit more exciting then.
As the first torrents of snow swirled around him and plunged the world into unbearable cold, Sunny raised his head to the dark sky and laughed. A few moments later, his laughter disappeared abruptly, and his face suddenly turned still. Only his eyes gleamed with a strange dark excitement. Something stirred in their depths. And at the same time, the darkness around Sunny stirred as well. Dozens of inky black pillars rose from the ground, followed by dozens more. They rose into the swirling snow like the fangs of a dragon, their needle-sharp points parting the wind with shrill whistles. Then, just as many tendrils of darkness wrapped around the shadow javelins, turning into inky black hands. Each hand had 7 fingers, ending with sharp claws. Sunny raised a hand, and at the same time, the shadow hands raised the great javelins. He stared into the swirling snow with a cold smile. He was not satisfied with being a transcendent siege engine. To welcome the winter beast, he was prepared to summon forth an entire division's worth of devastating artillery.
I'm going to drown you, bastard.
Letting out a low growl, he waved his hand forward. The world seemed to shatter from the thunderous roar when countless black javelins tore the swirling snow apart and shot into the depths of the raging blizzard. Dozens of black javelins shot into the raging snow, violently tearing a path through the blizzard. Each weighed more than a ton and moved with supersonic speed. The devastation they could visit upon the desolate landscape of the Antarctic Center was immeasurable. But much more important than the kinetic force they carried was the mystical force of their transcendent nature. In the world of the nightmare spell, there were rules and laws that trampled reason. A corrupted titan like the Winter Beast could shrug off a railgun shell, but it couldn't ignore the blade of a saint. Sunny had always known about this odd dichotomy, but only now that he was a transcendent had he gained a hint of understanding regarding it. He had vaguely sensed on many occasions the world pushing against him, and his will pushing back against the world. The higher one's rank was, the more they were able to resist the pressure of the mundane and forcefully exert their will upon the world as well as other living beings populating it. When 2 transcendent wills clashed, That was why, perhaps, a powerful abomination could survive a nuclear blast, but not a blow delivered to it by an awakened such as him, because an explosion did not carry an awakened's lethal will. In any case, the Winter Beast was going to have a problem dealing with the Black Javelins, both because of the mundane force they carried and the mystical force infused in them. That was if Sonny could actually hit the creature, of course. Blinded by snow, he closed his eyes and concentrated on sensing the shadows. His body was assaulted by unbearable cold, the crushing wind trying to bring him down. The wind was growing more ferocious, and the cold was becoming more calamitous by the second. The waves of heat rolling off the exploding volcano lessened the cruelty of the snowstorm a little, but not by much. Counting the seconds, Sonny concentrated on the distant place where the cold was the most terrible. Out there, even shadows could not withstand it, becoming frozen and still. There was a vast blind spot in his field of perception, so even though he could not sense the body of the Winter Beast, he knew where to aim the javelins. Come on. There were almost 15 seconds left before his missiles reached the target area, which did not mean that Sonny would simply wait patiently. Serpent. Responding to his voice, the giant creature turned into a tide of darkness and flowed under his armor. A few moments later, it had already turned into a serpentine tattoo. Curses. The very first javelin had survived more than 20 seconds in the snowstorm, but the force of the wind and the fatal cold were much more dire close to the area where the Winter Beast was hiding. Some of the shadow projectiles were thrown off course by the hurricane, falling into the snow with thunderous explosions. The rest were swallowed by the cold and sapped of power, turning dead and brittle. Despite how much effort Sonny had poured into them, the speed and power of the Black Javelins ended up being insufficient. Even if they struck the body of the Titan, they would just shatter into ice without leaving a mark on it. As the fourth salvo shot into the snowstorm, Sonny dismissed the shadow hands and opened his eyes, looking ahead grimly. There was still hope. The Winter Beast was drawing closer with each second, so the second and third salvos would have spent less time in the blizzard by the time they reached its heart. And yet, Sonny felt pessimistic. Just as he had expected, the second salvo only managed to devastate a swath of plain in front of the Titan's intangible fortress of fatal cold. The third one was swallowed without leaving a scar on the storm. He grimaced. No, it's for the better. Sonny had been afraid that there would be no chance for him to clash with the wretched creature face to face. No, it seemed that his worries had been unfounded. If he wanted to kill something, well, he had to kill it with his own two hands. What was he saying? As he sighed and took a step back, the fourth and final salvo hit. However, it did not strike the heart of the storm. Instead, each of the javelins struck a particular spot on the vast field of snow, producing an earth-shattering explosion. And in response to that devastating attack, the snow split open across the entire region, unleashing a torrent of angry red glow. The entire region where Erebus Field had once stood suddenly fractured. Vast fissures opened in the snow, widening with each moment. Immense sheets of snow tilted and slid underground, collapsing as they turned into billowing avalanches. At the same time, the fissures glowed with angry red light, and torrents of lava shot from them, devouring the plain. The world was enveloped by a raging blizzard, so no one would have been able to see the awesome spectacle of the fiery cataclysm. Sonny himself only saw flowers of orange glow, blooming here and there in the howling darkness. He swayed, struggling to stay on his feet. The chain reaction of chaos and destruction that the fourth salvo of the Black Javelins had caused was his measure in case a melee clash with the Winter Beast seemed unavoidable. The terrible heat of the molten lava was not going to put a dent into the titanic snowstorm, of course. In fact, the lava was already turning into volcanic glass. However, more of it shot from underground, an immeasurable amount of snow had been instantly turned into great clouds of boiling steam, which then swiftly turned into a torrent of hail. The whole world was torn apart by the clash between the incinerating heat and the obliterating cold, becoming consumed by chaos. The cold was winning, of course, but it was also being weakened, even if not by much. Considering that Sunny was about to face the very worst of it, though, every little bit counted. As for the sudden collapse of the snowfield, that was Saint's doing. Fiend had been responsible for starting the volcanic eruption, but Mount Erebus was at a distance. If Sunny wanted to drown the winter beast in lava, he had to make sure that the whole region would crack open. That was not too hard to achieve, considering that the ruins of the siege capital buried under his feet were already unstable. With Saint creating channels for the lava to flow and deepening the already existing caverns, all Sunny had to do to cause a cascading collapse was deliver powerful shocks to shatter the meticulously prepared weak points in the icy crust. After that, nature would take its course. Of course, it was a bit degrading to use a great warrior like Saint to dig glorified trenches, but that was what made the winter beast so vile. Its cold countered most of Sunny's powers and made it impossible for his subordinates to fully exert theirs.
I'll just have to make sure it pays for that affront as well.
As he felt the very life being slowly sapped from his body by the killing cold, Sunny took a few more steps back and then inhaled deeply, ignoring the feeling of his lungs being cut by icy blades.
Not that far now.
Then, his laughter turned into a chilling growl, and the towering giant exploded forward like a dark tsunami. An entire area of the snowfield was obliterated by his initial push. A crushing shockwave spread from the point where Sunny's foot dug into the ice, but he was moving faster than it. Faster and faster and faster still. The shadow giant tore through the snowstorm as he ran, effortlessly leaping over the vastness of fissures and sending fountains of incandescent lava into the sky when he stepped in them. As if stepping into puddles, his speed increased more and more until it was as if a black meteor was flying above the snow, moving parallel to it. The bitter cold sank into the towering colossus, trying to shackle him and slow him down. But Sunny simply broke through the cold. Even as he felt the outer layers of his shell turn to ice, the heart of the snowstorm was already in front of him. He dove into its terrible embrace, trying to accelerate even more. In the end, the cold was just too much. With his giant body incapacitated by its fatal force, Sunny couldn't keep up anymore. He lost his balance and fumbled, almost falling down. There was no time to take the next step, and yet his speed was so great that he was carried forward by pure inertia. That inertia was just enough to bring him into the eye of the storm. There, Sunny finally saw the winter beast. The frozen lips of the shadow colossus shattered into pieces as he bared his teeth in a vicious grin.
Well, aren't you ugly?
The snowstorm manifested by the winter beast was like a rolling cataclysm. The devastating winds carrying a seething mass of swirling snow and tiny ice particles. Close to its heart, the ice particles were like a myriad of razor-sharp blades, shredding anything that had not been frozen by the unholy cold already. Each of the countless shards of ice had been part of someone slain by the blizzard once, perhaps. And yet, absolute peace reigned in the heart of the storm. A vast area beyond the invisible fortress wall of suffocating cold was entirely devoid of wind, snow, and ice. Everything was flawlessly still, as if nothing could move in this frigid kingdom, not even the winds of the blizzard itself. With the sky above shrouded by ash, it was dark here, with frozen rivers of lava glowing dimly as they turned to glass. The heat of the underground rivers of molten rock was powerless against the profane power of the corrupted Titan, and yet it was enough to buy Sunny a second or two more. The winter beast itself was floating above the ground in the middle of its frozen kingdom. When Sunny first saw it, he was taken aback. The creature was eerie and grotesque, unlike anything he had ever seen. Just witnessing it made him feel appalled, as if his senses were trying to reject the existence of such a being. The winter beast could not be called a beast at all. Instead, it was an expansive, ethereal structure made of ice, as if countless torrents of water had frozen when they exploded outward from a hidden source. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so organic. Although the Titan's body was made of ice, it also looked like a living creature. The twisting pillars of ice vaguely resembled parts of a mangled body, limbs, organs, torn intestines, broken bones, and desiccated flesh. It was as though a giant being had been meticulously disassembled into countless parts and then violently fused together in macabre disorder. There were dark shapes of other nightmare creatures fused into the ice here and there as well, still and lifeless. The ice was pale and bleak, but the winter beast itself was nevertheless full of color. That was because numerous flowers bloomed on the ice, their petals an intense azure color. The contrast between their vibrant beauty and the appalling body of the creature beneath was hideously striking. Vast plumes of snow drifted from the flowers like pollen, shrouding the winter beast in a frosty haze. It was both beautiful and harrowing, but mostly harrowing. At the very heart of the eerie abomination, barely visible through the ice, a small shadow was encased in it. Sunny thought that it resembled the remains of a human being, but he wasn't sure. And then, Sunny pulled the winter beast into the shadows. "Let me help you off your throne, you abominable wretch." In war, the best advantage one could gain was fighting on a battlefield of their choosing. Sunny was currently in the very heart of the winter beast's storm, where his enemy wielded the most power. He was going to carry both of them away from this frozen hell. Shadowstep had undergone an evolution during his transcendence, so Sunny could carry living beings with him now. Sadly, he could not leave them in the dark realm of shadows, but he could very well transport them to someplace else in the material world. The range of his teleportation had also increased drastically due to how far his shadow sense could reach. Of course, teleporting a corrupted Titan against its will and over a vast distance was going to burn an immeasurable amount of his essence, but it was more than worth it. Come with me, beast." He would have grinned if his lips hadn't been frozen and shattered already. Sunny exerted all of his power to pull the winter beast into the shadows. The Titan tried to resist, but it was of no use. Perhaps if it had reacted sooner or knew the enemy better, such an outcome could have been prevented, but not anymore. Even when the hands dragging the creature into the darkness turned into ice and shattered, it was already too late. The crumbling giant made of shadows and the appalling creature of azure flowers and pale ice suddenly disappeared from the frigid stillness of the snowstorm's heart. A split second later, both of them emerged from the darkness in the internal depths of Mount Erebus, plummeting into a vast lake of incandescent magma. Sunny's crumbling shell and the eerie ice flower of the winter beast's vessel plummeted from the darkness into the vast lake of bubbling magma. The frozen hell of the calamitous snowstorm had been left behind, and although Mount Erebus was already swallowed in its ruinous embrace, the unholy cold did not reach this underground cauldron. However, the winter beast had brought the cold, the snow, and the storm with it. The azure flowers growing from the corpses of the nightmare creatures that the ice had encased were still blooming with plumes of snow, and the creature itself was like the heart of an endless, empty, cold abyss. Several things happened before Sunny and his enemy plunged into the churning magma. First, the vast cloud of snow surrounding the winter beast instantly evaporated. Second, the surface of the fiery lake instantly cooled, turning into black glass. Third, the sudden changes in pressure and temperature, as well as the sudden expansion of a vast mass of boiling gas, caused a titanic explosion, throwing Sunny and the dreadful abomination apart. The explosion shattered the dome of the underground chamber and the crust of the recently frozen magma, which in turn started a chain reaction of devastating destruction. Far above and outside, the erupting Erebus shuddered and quaked, gargantuan stones exploding into the frigid air like cannonballs. A terrifying crack split one of its slopes, and after another cataclysmic quake, the entire side of the fuming mountain crumbled, letting the wind, the ice, and the snow of the unholy storm pour deep into the interior of the erupting volcano, where the blizzard came into contact with the endless mass of molten rock. A secondary explosion tore apart the snowstorm and shook the very heavens, much more terrifying than the first. As indescribable destruction spread, a towering mushroom cloud rose above the frozen ruins of Erebus Field, dwarfing the first one. All across the Antarctic center, the ground shook. Avalanches rolled down from snowy peaks, and several mountains collapsed. The ice encasing the frozen ocean split open, and towering waves of black water rolled from below. Deep underground, Sonny felt like he was caught in the middle of a collapsing star, bombarded by devastating concussive waves from all sides, wreathed in incinerating flames and suffocating cold. He moved his damaged shell to dodge the giant boulders that fell from above. The boulders crashed into the crust of frozen magma, breaking it and causing immense geysers of molten rock to shoot upward. Those geysers were immediately frozen, turning into glass pillars, only to be shattered a moment later and collapse in a rain of obsidian shards. It was a scene of absolute chaos, like a chilling glimpse of fiery hell. Sonny wanted to laugh. Did I complain that the battle was not exciting enough? The winter beast was not damaged by the incandescent magma at all, even if it directly opposed the power of unholy cold. Instead, the entire lake of magma cooled, its very heart turning into a vast expanse of black glass. The Titan was momentarily trapped in obsidian, fused into it like the corpses of the nightmare creatures were fused into the hideous ice of its body. Sonny was full of furious glee at witnessing that moment. Using the Feather of Truth trait of the Onyx Mantle, he turned himself as heavy as he could and toppled straight into the immobilized abomination. With no hands to deliver a blow, he brought his own head down on the cracked ice. The force of the impact was so terrible that there was a flash of light, and the entire mountain shook. The dark giant's skull cracked, but the cold carapace of the winter beast finally cracked as well. A myriad of ice shards flying away. It moved, easily breaking free of the obsidian lake. The gargantuan stalks of ice moved as well, wrapping around Sonny and pulling him closer to the ice. At the same time, ice spikes formed below him, shooting forward to impale his mutilated shell. The upper part of his broken head was already fused with the ice, turning still and brittle from the frost. Almost immobilized, Sonny was being swiftly assimilated into the winter beast's body. All around him was pale ice, painted beautifully in shades of vivid azure. He was caught exactly where he wanted to be. Instead of trying to free himself from the icy tomb, Sonny used his broken limbs to push himself further down into the fracture that he had created in the frigid carapace of the profane Titan. He snarled and used his bared teeth to bite down ferociously on the vague shape of the heart of the eerie ice creature. The skull of Sonny's battered shell had cracked, and the upper part of it had fused with the ice. That part was torn off when he pushed what remained of his body into the fractured ice, spilling shadows like a tide of black blood, but his jaws were still intact. With most of his limbs gone, and his colossal body swiftly turning into ice, Sonny let out a frenzied growl as he opened his skeletal maw and bit down on the small silhouette encased in the heart of the winter beast's appalling vessel, slicing it in half. A moment later, his teeth exploded into a rain of ice. His mutilated shell was far too damaged and would have already crumbled if it had not been fused into ice, becoming a part of it. His soul was cold enough that even the terrible pain ravaging it had been swallowed by a peaceful numbness. That peace was a herald of death, but none of it mattered. because the moment Sunny destroyed the source of the winter beast, the abominable sculpture of ice that had served as its body shuddered, and then it started to crack. He heard a gleeful laughter ring in his mind, breaking through the haze of stillness that was consuming it. Glee, triumph, vindication, pain, sorrow, guilt, hatred. Countless emotions were fused into that laugh, creating an eerily disturbing mixture. Sunny recognized the laughter as his own. Or was it a scream? He was laughing because the winter beast was dead. There was no nightmare spell to celebrate his win, but Sunny had sensed a trickle of shadow fragments entering his soul. The harrowing titan, winter beast, the bane of the Antarctic Center, and the executioner of Falcon Scott. The abominable horror that had stolen the lives of Sunny's soldiers and taught him how unbearably crushing a defeat could be was gone, slain by his own hand no less. Vengeance was so sweet, but that sweetness was also indescribably bitter because it carried the memories of what it was exactly that Sunny had longed to avenge. Imprisoned in the depths of a frozen shell, Sunny cut off his senses for a fleeting moment. Left alone in the darkness, he whispered. There was no sign of the vague silhouette that he had bitten in half anywhere in sight. It must have turned to ash like the rest of the corpses fused with the abomination. The remaining ice, what had been the innermost core of the Titan's body once, was not melting, but neither was it radiating a sense of fatal cold. That cold was there still, but now it seemed to be contained within the ice, instead of spreading outward like a curse. In the flaming darkness of the obsidian lake, the mystical ice looked almost like frosty metal. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then sighed, coughed violently. He placed everything inside, the soul shards, the fragments of frozen shadows, and the pieces of pale ice. It's over. The winter beast was dead. He had settled the score and avenged himself. He'd avenged everyone else as well. His business in Antarctica was finished. Suddenly, Sunny looked tired. He glanced around, his gaze a little lost, and then asked quietly, "Now what?" Of course, there was no response. There was no one to respond either. In the silence of the obsidian lake, Sunny rubbed his face tiredly and closed his eyes. I'm tired of this place. Not the depths of Mount Erebus, not the ruins of the Erebus Field, and not even the Antarctic Center. Sunny felt tired of this world. Nothing was holding him back here anymore, and so he decided to leave. A dozen seconds later, his figure disappeared from inside the broken volcano and off the face of the earth. He would not return to the waking world for 3 long, lonesome years. Cassia slowly closed her eyes and turned away from the young man sitting in front of her. His delicate appearance, polite demeanor, and modest smile were so unlike the frightening, unhinged demon she had witnessed in his memories. Witnessing one's memories was a strange affair because what had been and what people remembered were usually 2 different things. Memories were vague, disjointed, and fragile, like the fragments of a fleeting dream. Some were vibrant and deeply etched, some were dull and shallow, some were bright, most were full of sorrow. But the Shadow Saint possessed an unbelievably clear memory. It was striking, second only to Cassia's own, now that she had transcended. It was as if nothing he had experienced was ever truly erased, at least not the details of the memory he had chosen to show her, which must have been important to him. What an irony, then, that his whole existence had been erased from the world. There was a problem with reading his memories, though. Firstly, the way the man who called himself Sunless perceived the world was simply too strange. Even Cassia, who was uniquely suited to having multiple points of view and had already experienced the way he sensed his surroundings through her ascended ability, found herself feeling dizzy from the avalanche of unfamiliar sights and sensations. Secondly, and more importantly, there were countless gaps in her recollection of what she had seen. Those were the moments where the young man pretending to be a humble shopkeeper Thought, spoke, or felt something about the places and events that had been erased from everyone's memories. In the end, what she had witnessed, or rather, could remember witnessing, was even more disjointed than the memories of ordinary people. The chilling images. A young man with alabaster skin crawling from the black water on the cracked ice, his eyes brimming with unfathomable darkness. The eerie city where a terrible slaughter had taken place, but only emptiness remained. The days of slaughter across the desolate expanse of the abandoned continent, the snow turning crimson from the spilled blood. An aloof figure observing from a cliff as an army of enslaved nightmare creatures marched to their deaths into a raging blizzard. The furious battle under the slopes of an erupting volcano. The harrowing strength both the monster and the man had shown. The culmination of it all, and so much more. Cassia scowled. Why? Why was it so hard to cling to the very idea of it? She had to know. Countless thoughts surfaced in her mind, clicking together as they assembled into chains of logic.
The frozen siege capital must be Falcon Scott, the fallen bastion of the Antarctic Center. He had returned there as a former member of the First Evacuation Army. That winged beast he used as a mount was unmistakably a Spire messenger. I was right after all. He was with us on the Forgotten Shore. However, the Firekeepers only joined the Southern Campaign after the Antarctic Center was swallowed by the Chain of Nightmares, which means that he was never one of us. What relationship did we have? Was he one of Gunlock's lieutenants? A prominent hunter of the outer settlement? Someone who paid tribute to live in the castle, like Kai and Eiko?
He could have been sent to the Forgotten Shore the same year as Cassia and Nephis, but that was exceedingly unlikely. There had been only 3 people who reached the Dark City that year: Castor, Nephis, and Cassia herself, due to being dragged along by Nephis. Or had there been someone else? Her memories were vague, which meant her train of thought broke apart and faded, even the memory of having such thoughts disappearing from her mind. She vaguely sensed what had happened and tried to retrace the steps of her logic, but to no avail. So Cassia continued to think and find more pieces to fill the void. Sunny's smile dimmed a little. Why would I harm Changing Star? She is the cornerstone of my survival after all, and therefore the integral part of my plans. The blind seer raised an eyebrow.
Your plans? And what are you planning exactly, Lord Shadow Sunny?
He laughed, then abruptly fell silent. After a while, Sunny spoke in a subtly insidious tone. Well, the future might be unknown to me, but one thing is certain. Very soon there will be a war for the throne of humanity. Anvil, Keysong, maybe even that third one. They will clash, and knowing Changing Star, she will insert herself into that clash somehow, to slaughter them. He shrugged. So why not make sure that when the dust settles, she is the one sitting on the throne? That is my plan, to hand her the crown. No matter how I feel about Changing Star, I absolutely despise those 3 ghouls. Not to mention that I absolutely do not trust them to keep me alive, so there's that. Cassia remained silent, facing him with a frown on her delicate face. Eventually, she turned away.
Time is short. The moon will disappear soon, so we must hurry to leave. I'll be waiting for our meeting next month.
A crooked grin twisted Sunny's lips. As you wish, Saint Cassia. He rose, ready to activate Shadow Step, but then stopped. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then coughed and asked awkwardly, Oh, about that memory you wanted to commission. I am really quite good at making those, you know. Cassia tilted her head in confusion, then blinked.
Right. The memory. Of course. I'll send someone to you in a couple of weeks with all the details.
She took a step forward, coming practically face to face with Sunny, then placed her hands on his shoulders.
Pleasure doing business with you, Master Sunless.
He coughed. Yes, likewise. But why are you holding me? Cassia remained silent for a few moments, then elegantly raised an eyebrow.
Because you need to teleport me out of this terrible place. You weren't thinking of leaving me here, were you? I hope not.
In the courtyard of the nameless temple, a lonely figure was sitting on the black marble plates, shrouded in shadows. It was a young man with alabaster skin and onyx eyes, clad in an intricate suit of fearsome armor. His hair was long and darker than a raven's wing. In front of him, a frail tree was growing in the darkness, its branches brimming with wilting leaves. Sunny studied the tree and sighed. It's not doing well, despite my efforts. The tree was missing sunlight, what little of it there was in the outskirts of NQSC from where Sunny had stolen it. But it was resilient, just like the people there were. It had clung to life for a long time in that godforsaken place, and now it continued to do so here, in Godgrave. Sunny felt guilty towards the tree. It was the one he had cut 2 lines into to mark the passing of his parents. After claiming the nameless temple and coming back to the waking world, Sunny visited NQSC and took the tree away from the pitiful park where it grew. Of course, he replaced it with a different one. People on the outskirts did not have a lot of vibrant things to look at, and he didn't want to rob them of another one. Not that it mattered too much. Most of the settlers who chose to pass through the Dream Gates were not citizens, but those who had been discarded by humanity and hoped to find a better place for themselves in a different world. As a result, the outskirts of NQSC were much less crowded than they had been in his time, and would only grow more desolate as time went on. In any case, the familiar tree stood in the courtyard of his citadel now, and Sunny often came to tend to it, or gaze at it, as he contemplated various matters. It seems that Valor and Song have started preparations. It won't be long now. He sighed, then closed his eyes and dove into his soul sea. Such a simple thing, but it had taken Sunny more than a year to find a way back into the soul sea after being banished from the nightmare spell. Even then, he could only enter it after concentrating and meditating for a long time. At least for a while. He could do it on a moment's notice once again after another year of practice. The soul sea looked the same as it had before, but also entirely different. The vast expanse of silent water was the same. The 6 lightless suns hanging above it were also no different. Fiend was the easiest to deal with in that regard. All he needed was to devour powerful creatures or potent mystical materials to grow. Granted, his stomach was truly bottomless. The rascal had been feasting on all kinds of dreadful nightmare creatures for many years, but only advanced to the supreme rank recently, after consuming that great demon some days back. All of his attributes and abilities had grown stronger, but Fiend had not gained any new ones yet. The secret to Serpent's growth was also rather simple, since that shadow had always been unique. Its rank depended on how well Sunny had mastered Shadow Dance, while its class was equal to that of its master. Sunny could not receive Aspect Legacy relics anymore. However, he could still advance in his mastery of it. When that happened, Serpent would become supreme as well. Granted, he was wary of diving deeper into Shadow Dance due to losing his true name. Meanwhile, Nightmare had already become a transcendent terror, reaching the same class and rank as Serpent. It had taken Sunny a long time to figure out how to make this shadow of his stronger in the absence of the Nightmare spell. But the solution was simple. Nightmare fed on dreams of powerful creatures. He subjugated them, but also consumed them. That was how it could reach a higher rank. Even though the process was slow and fraught with danger, the way for the marvelous mimic to grow was also not that hard. It could produce soul coins by devouring living beings. Those soul coins could be used by anyone to strengthen their soul, but if fed back to the mimic, they would strengthen it instead. However, Sunny did not really need Mimic to rise in rank, for now. The most important traits of the marvelous Mimic, the volume of its dimensional storage and the intricacy of the shape it could assume, depended on the potency of its master's soul, not the Shadow's own. And finally, there was Saint. Looking at her, Sunny sighed. She was the only one he didn't know how to nurture yet. In the past, Saint grew in rank by consuming memories with the help of the spell, but now there was no way he knew of to strengthen her. As a result, his very first shadow had remained a transcendent devil to this day. Of course, as far as transcendent devils went, she was by far the most deadly one he had ever seen. But is it enough for what is to come? Sunny didn't know. Hearing someone walk across the marble floor of the dark courtyard, he dismissed the images of his shadows and left the Soul Sea. It seemed that he had a visitor. Sunny opened his eyes and summoned the helmet of the onyx mantle, hiding his face. The visor was not as ferocious and eerie as Weaver's mask, but it was also fearsome. Deep shadows dwelled in the crack of the visor, hiding his eyes, and the black plume of the onyx helmet moved slightly in the wind. A moment later, the darkness of the courtyard was dispelled by soft light. Sunny did not move, waiting for Nephis to approach. Of course, he was observing her through the shadows. A dull pain suddenly pressed on his heart. She has changed. The source of light was Nephis herself, a ball of white flame dancing on her palm. He remembered that she had used a few memories to produce fire and light in the past, after returning from her second nightmare to spare herself the pain of calling upon her aspect. But now, it seemed, that was not the case. She reached him and remained silent for a few moments, looking at the frail tree with a slight frown. Soon enough, her gaze grew a little confused, and then cleared. "Is that a mundane tree?" Sunny nodded. "Indeed. I'm afraid it's not doing well here in the dream realm, away from warmth and light." He had tried many ways to substitute both through sorcery, of course, with little success. Nephis remained silent for a moment. "The aspect of one of my people, Shakti, has to do with nurturing plants. I can ask her to take a look." He turned his head slightly, staring at her with his own pair of eyes. "That would be appreciated." She smiled faintly and looked at the wilting leaves. "I must admit, though, I never imagined someone like you would feel sentimental about a tree, Lord Shadow." Sunny tilted his head. Sunny sighed behind the visor of his helmet. It was so dark and peaceful here before." Apart from those brief few days last year when a handful of sacred sleepers resided in the Nameless Temple, his life here was rather peaceful. It wasn't going to be peaceful much longer. Sunny moved a hand and the shadows rose from the floor, forming a detailed terrain map of the known part of the dream realm. The firekeepers stared at it for a few moments, then coughed and put the paper map they had brought away. Sunny approached the dark map and stared at it for a few moments. The hollow mountains rose like sharp fangs from the marble floor. Far to the south, a black castle stood in the middle of a black lake. A great bridge connected a tall peak to a formidable volcano, with a beautiful black palace perched at one of its ends. Below it all, a black ship drifted in a sea of darkness. Many lesser citadels were scattered here and there. He was looking at something else, though. A black skeleton with its head resting on the outskirts of the hollow mountains. Nephis studied the map as well, then let out a barely audible sigh. Finally, she said in an even tone, "The war between the sword domain and the song domain is inevitable. There is no connection between the two over land, and the House of Night is clinging to its neutrality, despite the desperate attempts by both great clans to forge an alliance with them, which means that a land bridge must be created, and will be created." She pointed to the black skeleton. "That land bridge is Godgrave. The great clan that conquers it first will have the ability to launch an invasion into the territory of the enemy. Even if a full invasion is impossible due to how well fortified the enemy is, the side controlling Godgrave can harass the adversary, disrupt supply chains, conquer weaker citadels, and strengthen their domain while weakening the other. Nephis looked at Sunny. So, Lord Shadow, you must understand what it means. He remained silent for a few moments, then said with cold indifference,
It means that neither side can allow the enemy to take Godgrave. So, this death zone will not be a land bridge to start the war, but instead, the battlefield where the war will be fought.
and therefore, his peaceful life was as good as over.